Plus, Ultra presents the Grey Lodge Friday Night Gnostic Book Club, Nightside of Eden, Path 1. I'm Jin the Ninja. I host another show called Threshold Saints, but I've uh, been increasingly interested in what we are doing as a group with my fellow co-hosts. Of course, Solar Exile, Dr. William Birkin, and Mike. And we also have Monty and Matt. And let me just shout out Matt right away at the bat because he is traveling, but he held down the space. Him and Monty last week held down the space. Obviously, Joshua was here, and Mike was also here, and Leo. And we had a couple other people that don't always join, but we always appreciate that. That is why it's good, because then I can take a break if I need to. And I know it's covered, and I know it'll be good enough to go on YouTube. And I know I'm always proud of you guys, so just know that. But I know it's not, it's been a little rough, but I think everything happens for the reasons that they happen. And as you know, I do like that archetype of the Princess of Breaking Klippas. So, sometimes you have to rock and roll a little too, you know, shake out the debris. So that's okay. We rock and rolled a little. We're all good. Everyone's good, and this has been an incredible experience. And also, let me say for our intro. So Joshua and Matt and I did our third part. I think it was our third part of the Kabbalistic tree with Nick from Occult Rejects. It was so interesting because Matt often says, and I said this even in the episode, Matt often says, every time we decide to speak on Kabbalah, we always end up like encountering those same themes, ideas, concepts, densities, klipas, etc. throughout the week. And that was no more true than in that episode. So I've listened to it like 6 or 7 times. I know it's a little excessive, but I am a little bit like that, so excessive. So, but I realized like when Matt and Joshua were speaking, it was really profound because in a way I was saying, yes, I'm not good at that Sephira, and I never thought of myself as good at it. But I said something to Matt, and I said, like, this is so important. This is such an important Sephira to know your will. Like, because your will really carries you through. That specific one. And then I said, well, what is my will? What is my will? Is my will to quit? Is my will to run away? And actually, it wasn't. It actually wasn't. I realized it. I realized like I had taken on so many other people's ideas, opinions, perceptions, and I just needed to disaggregate and figure out like what really was the core, like what was the driving impetus. So it's not to be a YouTuber necessarily, but I actually think it's about like this and like how important discussions of magic. I know, Mike. I'm sorry. I'm going to use that the naughty word, but discussions of esoterica in consciousness. We'll say. Well, I'll give it that framing. But how important it's become to me, and how much I have a hard time relating to other people who can't. We'll call it hang. We'll call it just people who. It's hard. I'm not. I'm a loner by nature. I've said this so many times, but to not be able to just be yourself in a way, like yourself as in as much as we can be parasocially, but yeah, we all know each other's weird quirks, and at least to a degree, right? So it's kind of like being naked and discussing something that's very intimate, private, almost transgressive, and we do it together, which is weird and crazy. So thank you guys. I appreciate all of you, of course. And this show, the Grey Lodge, would not be a show with me. In terms of, I would not do it if it was just me. I only do it because it's a group show. Because I can just go on my show. I can just go off Twitter and, be mauling on my own. But I like the group show. That was my whole intention. And so, shut up, Solar. You always bug me. Anyway. But yeah, it is. It's about the group, and I like. I couldn't do it without you guys. So thank you so much, and appreciate it. And so obviously, I'm gonna let you all introduce yourself. I know it's a little ooh woo or sappy, but I get like that a little bit. We are gonna do an invocation to Babylon before we start reading. I wrote one really quick, 6 lines, 6 bars, 6 verses, you could say. But I want you to It'll be good. I promise, Joshua. You think I wouldn't? You think I wouldn't write bars I thought were readable? Yeah, of course I did. So at least I think they're good. Maybe you guys don't think they're good, but I think they're good. So okay, I'll let you introduce yourselves, each of you, and plug whatever you want, and just know that I'm in a great mood. I'm not mad at any of you. Not that I'd have a reason to be. And for those of you that have helped me through everything, I think I owe you a lot, even though I know that's probably not the right framework, but just for showing up, I appreciate it. So just know that and carry that with you through the space. Okay, we just lost Solar as our listener, and I know it might just be a connection thing. Anyways, but we'll start. Joshua, plug yourself, any projects. Also, our episode coming up on Saints next week. Your episode and Matt's episode with Dapper Zan will drop. So Resident Evil, our first one, and then the episode with Zan, which is on Music of the Sephira. So I'm shouting it out now, but you can say whatever you want. Sorry, Joshua, go ahead.
Music of the Sephira. Wow, that sounds like a real banger. I'm going to catch that one for sure. Yeah, check out Threshold Chains. It's a really great way to catch podcasts because on Spotify, you can listen to them driving, even if you don't have good signal. So I've really been digging those here lately because I drive a lot. You can also catch a blurb I did on Symbolic Studies' recent episode on Virgo symbolism. He's now moving on to Libra. But it's still September, so go ahead and check out that episode. Symbolic Studies does some great work. King of Cups and I did a space last night on some of the Kirk stuff and other surrounding phenomena. That was a really fun time, actually. And we'll have some other stuff coming out here soon. But yeah, it's always a pleasure to be collaborating with folks, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. So thank you all for joining us and sharing time and space.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Mr. Solar Exile, please go ahead, brother.
Yeah, sorry about the DC. I fixed the issue though. It won't be an issue going forward. Yeah, Solar Exile. I have a couple episodes on Threshold Saints. I think one and probably the only appearance on Occult Rejects with Dr. Flowers. Yeah, I'm sort of just called generally left-hand path practitioner. I also sit a lot of Dzogchen. It's kind of my foundation, my Yesod, if you will. Yeah, nothing really to plug. I should have something that might go to print next month, but I will promote it once I have a date on that. Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you speak on Kabbalah again. Nice to hear that. It's refreshing. Um, I'm just teasing you. Okay, Mike, please go ahead and know that, Mike, you are new, but you're not really new anymore. You've been through the trial by fire. So you're one of us. I require you here. You're a great astrologer, and I really love all the contributions you made on in the past weeks, but also especially last week since I wasn't there. You really held your own, and I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jen. I'm very flattered by your words. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I feel like I'm part of the group with you guys as well now. It's definitely a little bit of a journey, but I have connected with you guys and resonate with the group generally like pretty well, and I'm happy that I could be a part of it. And I do stuff in many different areas with esoteric stuff. I have nothing to plug right now. I'm not really sure how much I have to add into the conversation of Nightside of Eden. I've read a little bit. I It's a very challenging book to read, honestly. So I'm kind of even curious what everyone else is going to say. But I am here to hopefully just uplift the vibes and add commentary where I can. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'll do the quick little invocation, just like set the space, set the tone. Maybe I hate this metaphor, but I'm going to use it. I'm going to steal it from Solar. Is that we're going to build the egregore? So yeah, we'll do that. But we're going to build one that's already real. So I don't know what that's called. I'm not that much of a, I don't know about that stuff. I raise a sword in the vow of Avalon, kingdom of the mist. I call from Earth to the names of Babylon, Princess of the Abyss. 777. Okay, there we go. Space blessed, ready. Carnal ground invoked, ready. Okay, so we are discussing Nightside of Eden, which is a very interesting. Oh, I can't say that either. It's a great book. I'll say a positivistic value. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really okay. So I've read it before, and Solar was reading it, and then of course I'm like, of course I have to keep up. So then I was like, I have to read it like again to see like all the things that I don't remember. So that's really how it started. We were supposed to read a Crowley book, as some of you know, and we ended up not doing that for various reasons. But this actually made a lot more sense. I think it was like much more synchronistic. So it obviously touches on things that we've discussed as a group before, and with the daughter, Frater Achad. I'll just say that right at the front too, because it does come up again. And I didn't really realize how much Kenneth Grant spoke about Kabbalah. I did, but I didn't. Like I remember it, but it's vague, right? Like I knew, but I didn't know. And interestingly, I actually have an episode with Alison Quinn. We didn't really discuss this book per se, but we did discuss Grant and the Typhonian OTO. So I do have some more recent memories of it, but I feel like my perceptions of the Typhonian OTO is really the focus on like the grandmother kind of Barbello figure, as well as like the dragon, Typhon, sometimes Set, sometimes not the same. And it's not that it's not that we don't account for that, or that I don't account for that. I do account for that, like cosmologically and ontologically. But it's not like my particular fascination. Like we have them, so I'm like cool with it, but I don't, it's not my hyper focus. Just like the Klippas aren't my hyper focus. That's kind of why I like the daughter, because you can go down there, break the Klippas, come back up, and it's all good. It's like very gray almost. So that's where I think that I I want to start. Maybe Solar is better at. We'll give it a cleaner, more precise frame. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Solar.
No, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so sorry everybody. I think I brought this to Jin, not with the intention of reading it as a book club or whatever. But yeah, no, I'm guilty. I have worked with or whatever certain contemporary organizations that are very much like downstream of Kenneth Grant. But it's kind of one of my bits at this point of where I don't do the homework. I had never actually gone back and really read Kenneth Grant. I read very little Crowley, right? So for me, this was putting a lot of pieces together that sort of makes something like, I don't know, the sort of current curriculum of Temple of Ascending Flame or Dragon Rouge comprehensible, right? And also to sort of understand this really, really critical like hinge point, as I'm just going to call him Kenny G. For this space because I think that's funny. Yeah, so like Kenny G is this sort of critical intermediary between like what I would consider like orthodox like telema or like Crowley proper, right, and all these other sort of contemporary sub traditions, right, as well as even things that are not like directly downstream but very clearly influenced. So and yeah, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of things that I want to, that I think are interesting. Well, they'll come up. But yeah, no, I'm really stoked to talk about this. I didn't realize how big my blind spot was by not understanding the kind of point of origin for all this stuff, right? Typical me, but
I agree with all of that. I think that this is a dense book, like shockingly dense, and not necessarily occult text dense, in my opinion. I found it I actually really like that he starts off with Kabbalah. He talks about it. He talks about the past, the Klippas. Like, he lays out the cosmology. So you're kind of going, as we've often discussed, like magic is real. It's plus ultra space. I forgot to say that. It's all speculative. Everything we say is speculative. So you have to decide for yourself, discern for yourself, uh, what you believe is true, because you have to, kind of align with your will and your truth if that's what you want to do. But I'm just saying it speculatively. I think that he is actually taking you narratively on a journey through his system. That's how I read this book, at least the first 100 pages that I read. So, okay, yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say, so I read this right on the heels of reading the Magical Revival, which I know is kind of out of order in terms of the Typhonian trilogies or whatever, but fuck it, I do what I want. Yeah, I had no idea how sort of orthodox Crowley is kind of where he starts, right? He's sort of like reframing Crowley in terms of this like, and again, I say this because I was sort of an Evola guy. That was like how I cut my teeth, right? So if that's like the traditionalist school, right? This is like this cliphotic traditionalism, right? Where he's like sort of building up the sort of like mythos of this star mother cult, right, with dark origins in the continent of Africa and primeval man making its way through the land of Hem, Egypt, right, and then on through to Sumer and all of this stuff, right. But the first book that I read that we're not talking about is very much like that as a lens to sort of like recapitulate Crowley, but a lot more sort of like straightforwardly, right? And so it's really interesting to for me to like see the sort of growing refraction as he's moving into a sort of more distinctly Kenny G system, right? And there are a lot of like sort of strange possibilities and unresolved tensions that open up between his approach and his sort of like ontological understanding of things as well as like the maybe more details practical stuff of his system from Crowley, like the farther away he gets from that. But yeah, the other book even more than this one is extremely heavy on Kabbalah, right? Like it was a bear to get through as he's going through like numerological correspondences and stuff like that. Like it very much has like if that's your thing, this was it surprised me to see how greatly that was emphasized. You know, it's very much that.
I totally agree with that, 100%, all of that. I think it is interesting to look at it from exactly what Solar said, like the nexus point. Like very the Magus, like very Francis Barrett. Like you're looking at it as a place of coming together, right? Like just like we've discussed with Tantra and just like we've discussed with Sufism and all like Central Asian things, it's like there are places and points of coming together. And something I'm kind of realizing, like doing the interviews with the OTO guys, there were places and points of coming together in America, as you know, is a huge interest of mine. Let me just do room shout outs and then I'm gonna let Joshua go. So we have MT Well, Mr. T as I call him, Vajra brother. Thank you so much for coming, Logi. Cassandra, of course, Logi, content creator, Etsy, everything that she does, and check out her videos on fortune card and astrology. Thank you so much, Cassandra. Of course, we've got Zachary Shumar. Zachary is a co-host on Threshold Saints, and hopefully he'll come back for season 2 of Don Da Da, and maybe we'll make that happen with Monty, and that would be quite cool, I think. And so, thank you guys so much for coming. It obviously happens in consent, in synthesis, in your kind of perspective. Hi, Al. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you as well. And yeah, so sorry, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Room shout outs are important. So, oh, and speaking of which, I don't know if this the same Zach of the episode I listened to recently on Threshold Saints, but you guys were talking about Tracy a little bit, so I don't know if that's the guy, but that's been my favorite episode so far, maybe. Anyway, but I haven't read this book, and so I do have a copy of it now on the link here I can look at, and I recognize that the picture on the cover art is like a Babylon type thing, you know. But anyway, I was curious as we kind of get started here. I'm sure I'm not the only one who hadn't read it, but you maybe speculate on why it's titled the way it is.
Well, I mean, Solar can give his own answer. I'm just going to give my perspective for right now. So my perspective is that this is just a part of broader neo-Gnostic cosmology. That is obviously comes a lot from Telema, a lot from Crowley, but it also expands it and it also synthesizes a lot of new stuff. So there's a lot of Tantra in this book, a lot of Buddhist Tantra and a lot of Hindu, and specifically like Mahavijaya Tantra, which I'm very familiar with, obviously. I mean, not like, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with it. So for me, it's not a lot of the stuff he talks about. I kind of get it from one angle, but I might not understand all the sort of neo-Gnostic or Sumerian or other components necessarily, but I can understand it in the analogy. So I think it has everything to do with that Garden of Eden story. And so for us, or at least for myself, but I've also extended this to the Lodge, I've said that the Aeonic focus should be son and daughter. And he's saying, although he's clearly aware of it because of his citation of Frater Achad, but he's clearly saying it's more of this other figure, this more primordial figure, which of course is true also, but I don't know. I like an Aeonic cycle. I'm an axialist, so that's more my perspective. But I think he's doing a broad Gnostic cosmology, neo-Gnostic. Yeah, Solar. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, no, he's very explicitly Gnostic. Okay, how do I say this? So a lot of the people, even someone like Carlson, right, who I'm familiar with through you, like last year at some point, you pointed me towards his kind of classic work on the Cliffos. Um, so a lot of guys who talk about this will talk about the sort of sundering of the trees, or talk about the basically to sort of like equate on a certain level, like the tree of life and the cliphotic tree of death, whatever. But Grant actually goes a lot farther than that, right? So, and again, that's sort of part of his sort of cosmology of positing the sort of primal sort of figure of the chaotic mother, right? The sort of the chaotic womb of non-manifestation as being ontologically prior to any manifestation, i.e. the tree of life. So there's actually like a priority given. There's he uses, I think, on at least one occasion, the phrase like more real, right? That the sort of cliphotic tree is actually elevated above like the sort of tree of light, tree of manifestation, the tree of Horus, right? Which I find really intriguing, right? Because that seems to be a sort of like unique feature of his that was not necessarily taken up downstream from him, right? Or there's just a great diversity in approaches to this. And that's actually something that maybe I want to touch on, not that we have to go there right away. Um, is that he's seen there's this tension where on one hand he's sort of importing, he gets it from Crowley, where all of this stuff is taken to be essentially a map of the microcosm, and therefore also the macrocosm of the self, the psyche, however you want to understand that, it's soul, something like that. Um, Whereas for Kenny G, it's like no, these things, this sort of like realm of chaos of non-manifestation actually exists in a sense that is like sort of purely external and prior to anything else, right? Such that, well, I'll stop there for now, but it's kind of interesting because it takes it away, I guess, from like the, I guess what you would say, like, something that would harmonize with a more Buddhist perspective, right? He actually wants to posit it as actually sort of prior, actually sort of like existing in the world. But again, he seems to kind of vacillate on the issue, and I find that tension really interesting.
Well, not to well, I'll riff off your point because I think it's really strong. Is that I agree with you first of all, but I think that there's like that. I don't know the Hebrew. I'm not good at it. Okay, like the zimzum, like the constriction and expansion. I think that that's what he's doing narratively. He's exploring the idea without remaining fixed, but he has a general overview of how it should look. And I also agree that there is I mean there's a tantric component to all of this. There's an original, you could say original, if you want to call it tantric, gnostic hyphen like cosmology. Yes, there is. This is the story of Chamunda. This is the story of Ekajati. The primordial womb descends from the sky as from the primordial couple. She's the, the embodiment of Mamos, chaos. I mean, this is the tantric story. This is the story of Bonpo. This is the story of Nuwari Tantra. This is like the OG story. This is like the original Star Mother story. But she's a grandmother, and her womb is barren as well. So I understand what he's talking about fundamentally, and I don't even disagree with it necessarily. I mean, we do live in a. I mean, I don't obviously believe we live in a degraded aeon anymore, but I think that as of this writing, you could say that it's. I think all of these stories, if you want to posit it in a metafictional way, are kind of ways to break out of the klipa. That's sort of how I think of things. now. I don't know. Maybe that's too out there, but I sort of where I'm going. Yeah, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, I get so I totally agree with you, and I think he makes the most of that sort of like ambiguity or that flexibility. And again, I don't want to like stray to his sort of a spiritual descendants or whatever. So I was talking with one of my like formal superiors, mentors, whatever, in the organization that I'm a part of, and I mentioned that I was doing work from the Temple of Ascending Flame. Right, just because it's like, I want to finish what I started and kind of doing this. And he very glibly responded, "Oh, so you're you're practicing greater white magic, right?" In that sort of context, and I thought that was really interesting. The idea being that a lot of organizations that are kind of downstream of Kenneth Grant have this idea that so where Kenny G specifically is like, again, he has this ambivalence, right? He talks about, he brings through this idea of, oh, the black brothers, right, getting lost in the abyss and in the trappings of ego. He also has this kind of like complicated or ambivalent relationship with these sort of chaotic or demonic forces, right? But then organizations downstream of that very intentionally and deliberately understand themselves as trying to act as nexus points through which that sort of chaotic void dark side energy can sort of come through into our world of manifestation, light, illusion, however you want to say that, right? So they understand these things not just as sort of the shadow elements of the self, of the psyche, that need to be sort of integrated so that the sort of typical Telemite project of, merging with your holy guardian angel, or becoming your true self, whatever kind of stuff. It's not just that. They might still use that as kind of the orienting work of the initiatic program that they're doing, but they also see these forces as like, no, 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 there is this sort of other side of reality that we are trying to sort of not just invoke in this exclusively personal individual sense, but as part of a broader program to sort of, whether they see it as rebalancing, whether they see this as destructive and renewing, whatever, but it's yeah, that I find that very interesting, right? And you can see where Kenny G is kind of like going back and forth, saying, "Oh, this is really treacherous. It's really dangerous, but you can, do these really, this important work. It's actually necessary, to make your way up the tree, right? Blah blah blah." So
I agree with all of that, everything you said. No disagreement whatsoever. I think it's as we've talked about this so many times, just like in our past spaces. Obviously, is that it's not good to be transfixed to either the dark or the light. There are reasons for both, and definitely not the material, but definitely not the worldly spiritualism either. So that is a very Ketu, very like the smoky tail of the dragon. That's a very Ketu-like quality to focus specifically on material or on spiritual materialism, right? So I think that, but I agree that he's not quite doing that. Although you can make an argument about his use of sect magic. Okay, we can talk about that later, but and how I think that I'm not against it. I do get karma mudra, like I get it, but I just think like there are certain practices that are so fraught, especially in like moving. If we're saying, okay, so say we're in Kali Yuga, or say we're moving into a new aeon, there are certain things that we're gonna, like we always say, like some flowers you let go, some of the seeds you just like you don't continue. It doesn't mean that they'll never come back. It doesn't mean that they're not important. It doesn't mean you can't even study them. It just means like, what are you going to focus on in a pragmatic way? So I still like that idea of pragmatism, but I also recognize that like it's good not to be overly fixed. And so that's what I liked about reading this book thus far, is that I see the tantric layer very clearly. I see the star goddess layer. I see the matrika layer. I see like the grouping of seven sisters. I see like he's making connections. Like he's saying like Isis, Kali. Well, I would personally reject that. I think Isis, Tara. But even the story of redemption, like this kind of like yeah, we're in the klipa and then we have to break out, then we can like expand into the tree of life or the tree of light, whatever you want to call it. I agree. I'm not even against that cosmology. I'm not even against like, yeah, because that is kind of what aggregation is. That is kind of what sense pleasure is. Like maybe we are in it in the material world. I agree. And like we have all these things coming at us, social media number one, but all kinds of media that alter our perceptions, change our, the timeline. It's like we were surfing the timeline so well pre election Christmas. Like we were like, dun dun, dun. Everything was like just. I felt like we were like really seeing what was happening, and then everything went decoherent, which we also predicted. By the way, we did say this. It would just be overly incoherent, not just a time of decoherence, but incoherence. And so I think that all the responses, and this also goes back to the point about Tiferet. Yes, I'll let you go, Joshua, I promise. Just let me say this one point because it has to do with you. So we talked about ipsos as one of the key aeonic words. And I was always like nebulous about how I felt about it because I'm, Hode is cool, but like there's other things that I was interested in exploring. I realized like Tiferet isn't really ipsos. Tiferet is everyone in their own will, in their own voice, but also working in concert. That's the point I was trying to make at the very beginning. Like when we were doing the show, I realized it was like each of us speaking from our own viewpoint, our own standpoint, our own angle. But then we were all so aligned. And it wasn't fake. It was like completely, and it wasn't just me who thought it. I had multiple people, like obviously Nick even said, like, it was like you guys were just like totally in it, and I was like, yeah, we actually get like that not every space, but I would say we're often like that. So that's what I realized, like that's the true Tiferatic thing, is that we're all in our will, we're all in our, like we're all agential, but then we also come together. It's like the true synthesis. It's not like fake, and it's not mired by ego, because you realize like I'm not egoic in the sense that like I don't really compete. Like, yeah, I made a joke about competing book wise, but it's really about like I want to keep up with the material that Solar's thinking about, because I want to also think about that stuff. Like I also want to be thinking about the same things. It's not really competitive. I'm really competitive with myself. That's who's number one for me in terms of competition. So, and always has been. I've always been like that. And sometimes that can be to my detriment and my downfall. But a lot of times it serves me because I keep, like, that's how I keep up. But it's good. It's good he tells me, because then I know, and then I can be like, yeah, let's actually look at this and explore it. And maybe it's useful for us. And maybe it's useful for things that we actually have discussed in the past and now. Anyways, I wanted to say that. So that was my point about Tiferet, is that I only realized it, just as I only realized my will, in that show. So thank you, Joshua, and thank you to Brother Matt also for that. And Solar did get a shout out right at the beginning of that show as well. So I just want to say he was there in spirit. So yeah, and thank you guys. Okay, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And what you said about Tippereth just now was very profound for me, because it reminded me of what we kind of stumbled over. Something that was interesting to me was how there's multiple paths to Tippereth. And so maybe it can only ever achieve a fullness when each path is occupied or active or something. Maybe there's something there, because it seems to be fueled, if you will, by multiple valves or pathways. And then, of course, that's where the truest synthesis seems to be occurring. So I kind of think of it alchemically. It's like, well, to even achieve the crown, there must be some type of necessary work in the tipper right there. And I'm thinking of alchemical instruments, even, how some of them operate, so maybe tippereth's a type of retort, or, some type of distillation process occurs there, where all these ingredients are mixing. And so we looked at the, what was it, each letter that was on each of the paths. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 paths lead to Tipperet. And so it was Gimel, Hey, Zion, Yud, Lamed, Nun, Samak, and Ayin. And so I just wanted to include that, because I think it's very profound. Maybe there's something magical about the number 8, for that matter. Who knows? It kind of returns in on itself. But anyway, just wanted to schizo share for a minute.
That's not schizo at all, Joshua. You know why? Because in the book, he talks about the 16 kalas. So it's not really what that refers to. Kala just means time. So like you were saying, like time, obviously, I always say this, so if you've heard me say it, I apologize, but time is 8, but it expands into the 9, into your mind. So Kala Bhairava, the Time King, he expands into 8 different times: the time of the sun, the time of the moon, the time of fire, the time of water, the time of earth, the time of air. That's 5. The time of space, the time of death, and there's another one. And time and greater time, Mahakala, right? So that's 8. But there's also one more, and I am forgetting. I'm so sorry. But regardless, so he's 9, but he expands into 8 is basically the thing, and then you get 72 eventually in most lists, or 81. So you have this like reoccurrent idea of the 9, but it's also the 8. So yeah, I think, but really what he's talking about is the niches. So he's talking about lunar time that is divisible by the goddesses. They're not like the ones that are talked about in like Wicca or anything like that. It's not like Mother, Maiden, Crone. It's nothing like that. Like just completely abrogate that idea from your mind, because it doesn't really apply in tantra. It's really, you have to understand them individually as per the text, as per their names. Each of them have 108 names as well. But anyways, the whole point of the nicha cycles I think is interesting, because in tantra the nicha cycles are allowing sort of the princesses of the stars, is often how they're referred to liberate the upasaka from the material and spiritual degradation or conditions that he finds himself in. So even though there might be a transgressive nature to them, there is a redemptive element to them as well. So I don't know. I also thought the idea of what you said, Joshua, about bringing sort of like every one of us fulfills a path, and I always joke about that, and I said like, yeah, what am I, the dad? But even though it's really, but you really are the grandpa. So if I have to be the dad, then you're really the grandpa. So at least that is how it is, right? um but yeah, I totally agree with that. I realized that I was, because even Matt was saying like he was concerned that we didn't have a fire sign or an earth sign, and I was like, yeah, we'll be fine, because I'll make sure it gets done on my end. Anyway, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a sort of general question. It's something that it's a question I brought to the work, right? And to Kenny G in general. And I am still sort of like working my way through it, right? So the question is like, why would you explore the clephotic tree, right? The best answer that I had coming into this was that, and it's kind of like a practical sense. I think sometimes that when we're sort of like trapped in the sort of like epistemic world that we've created for ourselves, right? It can be very, very hard to um to put together an honest appraisal of whether you want to call it true will, your deficiencies, your what you actually need, right? Like I think we have an idea of like what our shortcomings are, what our imbalances are, and that may or may not map to whatever we might call like reality, right? Like what we really need. And so in that sense, and also too, I think we can kind of I don't want to say half-ass, but I think that when we're working with the kind of standard path workings, right? If you're going up the tree per like Dion Fortune or Greer or someone like that, I think maybe there's a chance to skim over uh, certain aspects of balancing that are maybe too subtle for you to sort of notice about yourself, or whatever. And so looking at the sort of clephotic reverse of the tree kind of allows you to jump right into the just to, I don't know, like sit in the splash zone, if you will, right? Like you are going to you're going to confront these things head on at 80 miles an hour, right? It's not just going to be the sort of like fuzzy positive, like, oh, I should do this better or try to like remediate this and something. It's like, no, 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 no. Like you're gonna, I don't know. It's a more sort of direct confrontation with these things, right? But that's a very like meh motivation, right? I'm not totally sure that I'm like sold on that personally, right? And obviously, like Grant has his reasons for it that are kind of based in his cosmology that he's kind of spinning up, right? But again, I'm sort of ambivalent towards that myself, right? I remain agnostic on a lot of those things. Let's just put it generously, right? And so yeah, I'd like to kick it to you. Like, what in your mind, if you had to steel man the case for directly engaging in clephotic path work versus simply trying to climb the tree of life, like why would one do that?
Are you asking me?
Well, yeah, and anyone else too, but yeah.
Okay. Well, for me, I didn't climb the tree in the traditional way, I think, as you know. So my experiences, I would consider them non-dual. So I think I encountered the Klipa as much as I encountered the Sephra. I think it was a lot about my own power, self-power, but I think it was also a little bit of other power. So I think both of those things were involved in how I have done it in the past and likely in the future. So for me, I saw both. I saw the carnal ground and I saw the splendor. Yeah, sorry, Solar and Joshua, whatever order you want.
Yeah, sorry, let me just jump in because I just like quick follow up. That's actually one of the things I really appreciate about Kenny G's. Can you guys hear me? Did it just drop?
No, you sound good.
Okay, sorry, it gave me the bloop. Um, so it really bothers me when I see the clephotic tree arrayed in symmetry, right? So you go from Malkuth down, right, and then start from there. I think it's much better to present these things both visually and conceptually as being like, whether you want to say layers or overlaid in a more harmonious way, right? I think actually he does a pretty good job of presenting this as non-dual, as being the kind of, because he uses the metaphor of the head a lot, right? That's sort of important to the etymology that he like works in the book. It'll be clear if you read it. And in my experience, as well as just kind of thinking through it systematically, that makes a lot more sense than trying to see these things in this more, I don't know, separated, what, like partitioned way, right? That emphasizes the distance ultimately between the Cliffos and the Spheros. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I mean, I agree. I obviously think that a non-dual middle path, non-extreme approach is the best, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to encounter the carnal ground. And like Tantra is also very confrontational, not just my kind or other people's kind or online Buddhist kind or even Bon. It's very ferocious at times. And yeah, so probably I'm okay with that, but then I can also see perhaps through life, but also through myself, its deficiencies and always being confrontational with those things that could be probably resolved in more skillful ways. So I agree with that. That's a good critique. I think that's a strong like balancing way to sort of amend what is happening. But I also think that people will encounter that because what we're really fundamentally talking about is also consciousness. So also things that may appear as phenomena, but like the carnal ground kings, like yeah, they're real, but so is your own mind, and you're generating part of them, at least partly, or their appearance, or you're understanding their appearance as something. So I think you're going to encounter all those things, but again, like if you can bring it back. And the thing with Tantra is like, yeah, he's focused on the star goddesses. Like I'm down with the star goddesses too. I like them too, but we self-combust the stars at the end of sadhana. So I think that's saying something as well. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I have two hands. Joshua, please go, and then Monty. I know Monty's hands up. Sorry.
I'd like to defer to Monty since he hasn't spoken yet, if that's okay.
Sure, of course. Monty.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. Thanks for having me up. It's good to see you all tonight. Um, I was just kind of like touched by something Jen said there about how like these practices are like confrontational. I think a lot of what gets lost in spirituality and like religion and things is this like idea of like a doormat. Like Buddhists take a lot of shit for like why do you want anything? Like even just the idea of wanting is this like really gross thing instead of like yeah. And so I think like one of the most important parts of and this is something that Matt mentioned last week is that everything is Kabbalah, everything. You do it long enough, it's Kabbalah, like, and you discover it, and it's like undeniable. And a huge part of it is like basic like self-respect and self-decency is like confrontation. Like once you go and cleanse your soul and you like and you're climbing the tree and you're like conscious of where you are in your journey, uh, being confrontational is like you basically are taking a leap of faith with every interaction. And like even if the end result is bad, then like congratulations, you scared off like uh, whatever like Klippa monster that was awaiting you. I just kind of wanted to chime in. That's all I really wanted to say. But yeah, hi everybody.
Thanks so much, Monty. Appreciate it. I know Solar's hands up, unless Joshua wants to go.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go. Thank you. So to answer Solar's question, from my perspective, I would say a couple of different things may motivate somebody to want to learn more about that sort of thing. And I think curiosity, for one, could be one, neutral motivation. But I think one of the others that I think I and probably a lot of people encounter is that when institutions that ought to be separatic become klipotic, you can sense that there's something off. And I think you can't really truly recognize or discern what that problem is unless you have some degree of familiarity with the klipotic energies, perhaps. So maybe there's some value in being able to identify it when you see it more easily. And so I think when you have the ascetic or left hand path, even in Christianity, for instance, like with the monks and stuff, that they are engaging in that suffering so that they practice in such a pure manner that they could really spot fraud instantly. Like they probably even have trouble going to regular churches, I would imagine, just because it's so um, you know in a sense to their practice, how strict they are maybe with their own practice. So I think also this might be uh, related to the twilight language, and because we keep talking about the stars, I've noticed. So of course the stars only come out at night, and um, although in scripture we are provided with plenty, it does talk about, I think in Daniel, maybe how God will reveal secrets to the wise or those who ask. So it's, even though you're being provided all you need, he can still give you more knowledge if you like. And I think it's given in sometimes in ways like this, like with the twilight language, as it were, because after all, uh, just like tonight, Friday night, the last day was a day like this in Scripture, and it's when the twilight occurs, that's when the next day of rest also begins. So inherently, with Hebrew anyway, there's this kind of connection and emphasis placed on the first Sabbath day being also a twilight kind of thing. So the moon and the stars here seem to kind of take a precedence there as well. But anyway, thank you. I didn't want to meander.
No, that was great, Joshua. Thank you so much. And thank you, Monty. Appreciate you. Glad you're here. We did shout you out right at the get. And thank you so much for last week. I just want to say it when he's in the room. Thank you, Monty, for holding it down for me. I thought you did a great job. Really strong space. Mike and Matt and Monty, they killed it. Thank you guys. Strong for being strong for me. I appreciate that. Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a few kind of quick follow-up things to think to people said. Yeah, I appreciate the sort of clarity on confrontation. That's something one that I've sort of like grown to appreciate about definitely some of the wrathful practices in like traditional Buddhist tantra. And again, I see a sort of harmony there. To use the cliche, right? Um, when you're actually naming the demon, right? Not necessarily in the goetic sense of binding it to your will with its true name, but in the sense of, again, when you're sort of like dipping down into the tunnels of Set, you know exactly what you're getting into, right? Kind of what I was saying before. But there's this, yeah, this emphasis on confrontation, in the same way that when you're endeavoring to do like shadow work or something like that, which is not something I have a huge degree of experience with, right? But it's like it's imperative. You will be wasting your time and jerking off if you're not able to sort of isolate, identify, name, right, this thing that you need to uproot or transmute or rectify, right? Like there's no And I think that the Qliphothic sort of concept, as well as from a kind of practical of doing these path workings or tunnel workings, whatever we're calling them, I think that's helpful. Also, just kind of from a practical application point of view, I found myself sort of getting kind of, I don't know, like creative, trying to basically, it's in the way that like the traditional like Kabbalistic tree identifies certain relationships between aspects of the divine, the self, etc., that may or may not be sort of obvious. This sort of like the obverse side, or like the reverse side of the tree, right? The Qliphothic tree. It also it got me thinking about different, the relationship between different like deficiencies, different weaknesses, different sort of like psychological or spiritual complexes, right, that may be interacting with each other in ways that are not immediately obvious to our waking, quote unquote, waking consciousness, right, the sleep of waking consciousness kind of thing, right. And so I found it to be a potentially useful analytic tool, right, to sort of understand what's going on with myself, and ways that I can actually fix it. And I guess just very quickly, the final thing I wanted to say that because Monty mentioned curiosity, right, which I think is a great motivator, right? I think it's lost on people, right, that the gateway is Da'at, right? Which means that from a practical, and again, Crowley has a ton to say about this, but like that requires stability and samadhi, which like I have a great deal of respect for, as something that has taken me years to begin to sometimes achieve, right? That's like not a joke, like that is not a like casual. And again, I sit every day, and have been for a few years. So I think there's that sense in which like this is like, I don't want to say dabbler proof, but it I think like it can be easy to overlook the fact that there is kind of a skill ceiling, or like or floor, excuse me, like an experience floor to this, right? That I don't know. I just kind of wanted to mention that, right? This is a fairly ultimately like high level practice at the end of the day. And if you look at this in terms of like AA grades, or like whatever, like this isn't like grade 1 or 2 or 3,
I'm going to be really quick. I totally agree with all of that. I see Mike's hands up, but I agree. And I wanted to say this. I think it's really interesting, since you practice Archin and I practice Maha Yoga or Jada Yoga, is that he talks about Rigpa, like right in the beginning. He talks about like the 5th level consciousness, like that. You ascend to the 6, you ascend to Tiferet, but then you come back down. This makes more sense in a tantric way, the 5 and the 6 like that, but because the 5 is really Yesod in the Mahavijja system. So it's not necessarily that it is, but there's more of a relationship with that number there. So then you sort of come back down, and then you have to sort of quell the inner fire, the Tumo. So that is kind of like as we always say, it's like the moon, Yesod, is where the secret threshold, right? Crystal Millennium Kingdom. Can't see it all the time, pink ray, but it's always there. Just like the star goddesses, just like Joshua said, right? Like, but because even when in the day, they're still there. Like the 7 Mamos goddesses, they're always there. Chaos is always there. Chaos is also there when you look for it. Chaos is also there when you engage in it. Chaos is also there when you're chaotic in your own mind. I can speak from this because this is an experiential thing, right? And I also think it was interesting what Solar said about like attaining, okay, call it samadhi, sort of like the fire of annihilation, whatever. Or emptiness. I prefer that. But okay, so you can, so that's one way. So obviously I've talked a little bit about Droyon before. Now, what Solar actually said is superior, because that is actually the stability. That's the true Yesod, right? That's the true Yesod of consciousness, is that kind of stability, is to be able to go there, not maybe every time, but you're kind of like, you're in and out and you're flexible to be able to go, and you can reconcile the experiences when you come back. Now, the Droyon way might take you there more often, but it's going to leave you a little more fucked up. So that is also the truth. So, but that is also why, as we have said, and just like sort of I laid out secretly, well, not really secretly, because I say that we're all magicians, and we all are metamagicians. So We talked about Tiferet right at the beginning. So that is kind of a reconciliation of those kind of different elements, just like Joshua said, of climbing the tree. It's like, what can we hear from each other's perspective on the book and on the experiences themselves, and then sort of reconcile in our own minds and be like, yeah, okay, I hear what he's saying. This is actually a really fair point. This is a really good like way to look at the text and reframe it even. So I just want to say that. Yes, I'm sorry, Mike, please go ahead.
Okay, that was great, Jin. That was really interesting. Solar, it's been really interesting hearing all of your insights into the Nightside of Eden, because honestly, that book is very hard to read. And this was last minute anyways. I didn't read the entire book. So I've just been laying low, trying to listen to what everything you guys have been saying. And it's all been super interesting. It makes me want to really understand it on a much deeper level. So with the Kabbalah and path workings, that's not something that I've um, done literally. With the way that I've done more inner work, I've kind of gone, I haven't had like a structured approach to the way that I've tried to integrate things within myself. It's kind of just been haphazard with trying to heal from things, and trying to progress spiritually, but then getting stuck. And then it's like, why am I stuck? And then I have to figure that out. And this has been a process that has been unraveling for a while now. And I've had a lot of things that I've had to integrate. And this is, I mean, I guess it's the same. The point I'm trying to make is just like my perspective of working essentially like through the tree, but not actually working through the tree. So, and Solar, what you mentioned, especially with shadow work was one of the, well, I think actually I was working with my chakras first, but shadow work was one of the first things that was really important for integrating parts of myself. And it seems like with working with the tree, it seems very, shadow work seems to be a pretty primary aspect of it, because that is very specific to your consciousness and integrating these parts of your consciousness. And I, especially years ago, I was very, very sensitive to the effects of my shadow, and I was almost forced to integrate it. I had no choice, because it was very debilitating, actually. I would have effects of my shadow that would not even like allow me to like exist publicly without integrating them. So for instance, like my eyes would move in certain ways and get stuck on certain objects, and I could not remove it from objects. And at the time, it wasn't super obvious how to integrate those aspects. In some cases, I kind of knew what the problem was, but just acknowledging it wasn't always fully solving it, but often it would. And it just understanding what that aspect of that is out of balance within you is the solution oftentimes. And it's not always one solving it once is not always solving it completely. Oftentimes, like I'll solve it, and then later down the road, like months or even years later, it might like come up again. Then I have to like reintegrate it, or it's just like a slower process. But recently, especially, something that has like really stopped me from moving further on the path of like traversing the tree has been having so many stuck emotions in my body. And I think that is something that is hard to fully access without certain like tools or technologies. There's ways that you can do it through meditation and through like breath work, through acknowledgement, and working through stuff. But I've been talking about this a lot on Twitter, but with acupuncture, and your body is the Kabbalah, and the different parts that correspond to the different Sephiroth have to do with these energies. So it's very related. And I've been releasing so many things within me that have allowed me to move forward spiritually. It's been a huge roadblock, because that layer of your just subtle energetic anatomy will block you. and will keep you from moving forward if you can't release those stuck emotions within you. And by releasing those stuck emotions, like your organs are tied to your consciousness. So when you're releasing it, you're actually like reworking your consciousness. And it's almost like a shortcut than having to like go through these like long drawn out processes of meditating and trying to understand and trying to like really access like certain like core memories and process emotions and stuff. Like it's a very long process that you might never even figure out, honestly. But for me, just personally, and I just wanted to 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 communicate that, is that with working with like the meridians directly and the organs directly, I've been able to like really rework my consciousness and unblock a lot of things that have been keeping me from moving forward.
Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you shared that, and I'm sort of interested. Going to sound Blavatsky-ish, right? Where I want to bring all these different sort of like ideas and traditions together to come up with some kind of like comprehensive understanding of these things. I know that's a doomed project. The reason I bring that up is I'm not someone who's paid a lot of attention to the kind of particulars. Either, I have some like very general understandings from my very like uh, dilettante studies of Nadan, right? Um, and I'm familiar with other systems, even more cursorily, right? However, just the I don't want to, I'm not trying to say like, oh, I'm so good at this thing. Just the the skills that I've developed simply in meditation have allowed me, and I've experienced this very recently. I'm not going to get into any of the specifics, it doesn't really matter, but things that would have emotionally affected me to a great deal, right? By simply being aware of what was going on with me, with myself, like physiologically, right? And in terms of like what my muscles were doing, what my nervous system was doing, where the kind of energy was bound up, like in the immediate aftermath of, things happening to me, like, seconds, minutes afterwards. And just by that, plus like very like stilling myself, just basically doing, like applying the same what I would be doing on a meditation cushion or whatever, it gave me a tremendous freedom, right? Of basically being like, being aware of this energy and then realizing that I had basically full control over the assignment of meaning to like what had just happened, right? That like I wasn't bound to any sort of like constraints of how I should feel about that, and sort of like understanding that this physiological reaction ultimately just had the effect of producing certain sort of like energetic patterns in my body, however you want to understand that, right? And it in thinking about like those couple of experiences that have happened within the last month, because they're very, like ready to hand in terms of my memory, right? um I'm sure you could really drill down, like if I had a more sort of systematic scientific understanding of that stuff, both in terms of wisdom science, but also, just like kind of Western, like anatomical, all those things, putting those things together, right? Like I could probably get even more mileage out of these things, and achieve an even greater degree of sort of control and power over these things. But it's really interesting to hear that, because you're kind of coming at it more from the angle of sort of direct engagement and modulation, like of those like currents or perceptions, however you want to say that, right? I just find that really interesting. That's all.
I agree. I agree with everything that everybody has said. But I do think it's interesting because if you like all in Chinese medicine, all illness is somatic. Like it's all manifestations of like these spiritual imbalances. Like even if the outer invading winds or the plague forces or the goo demons, like yeah, they can only really attach to you if you're out of balance, disharmonious. So but also in tantra, this is very very important, is that yes, the biological, like what Mike is saying, that's a real biological layer, but then also what Solar is saying, like this more mind layer, that's all, like they're different, they can be differentiated, but they're also the same, or they're at least empty. Yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, and it kind of circles back to the sex element of Kenny G's tantra, right? But I think that it applies just as much. And again, in my recent experiences, it definitely like showed me. So in the same way that Kenny G is all about basically the arousal of the fire serpent or the black serpent, depending on which chapter you're on, as being the sort of like this sort of secret technical foundation, right? Like essentially the magical motor, right? That powers everything. I did realize that it was like, oh my god, I actually, even though this thing has just happened to me, normally I would have processed it as terrible. I would have been feeling a certain way. Once I had sort of completely severed the what would have been these binding, stultifying sort of constraints, these relationships between what was going on with me energetically, the sort of like emotional whatever, which I basically just cut out instantly. Once I had control over it, what I realized is like, I'm like, oh my god, this is actually, I am brimming with power right now. I ended up not, I didn't have any magical working that I needed to do, in either of these recent incidents. So I just kind of like took that into myself and didn't really make much of it. But again, as someone who does do that stuff on a fairly regular basis, I was actually shocked that I was like, wow, this is actually a tremendously potent source of like attenuation and energy, that I wouldn't have even thought to have access to, but it required the, like we were kind of talking about, the ability to completely sort of like recontextualize these things mentally and psychologically, as well as to be able to, yeah, like kind of isolate the sort of energetic or physiological happenings, right? Like from the inciting external incident itself, you know what I mean? But it really opened my eyes in this like direct experiential way of power, or a pathway to power. Similarly, I see a direct analogy to the sex stuff, I guess.
Look, Karma Mudra is real. That's real Tantra. Like, that is real. But there's also like there's many ways to practice it. It is not just about consort yoga. This is the big misconception of the West. Most people who practice Karma Mudra do not have consorts, are not engaged in consort yoga. It's happening in your own mind or other power, because the other kind of visitation is real too. I don't know anything about that, maybe, but anyways, the point is that it's real. Like, it's real. Like, that is a huge energy thing. That's why we've talked about it, and that's why it's also been contentious for some of us. And like, no, I'm not excluding myself. It's just like, what frameworks are we going to use to describe like these things that are real, that are worth discussing? But like, as Monty said, like, it is an aeon of self-respect. And so this has been like something that I've said, because that is also like, that's about like what you think that is. Like, I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't want to tell you like, I'm saying that this is just my perspective. This is, I frame it as Aeon of the Daughter. This is what her qualities are. I use Buddhism. I use Gnosticism, and I'll use the Mary Magdalene mythos here and there. But I'm really just talking about like love, emptiness, and will. So very much what he's talking about. Obviously, he kind of embeds it deeper, and he has other ways of exploring those same ideas, as I think we've also explored them. But it's real. It's worth discussing. I just think it's from my own experience in non-concert yoga, I think that it's really powerful as well. But I think that yeah, it's extremely powerful, and I think that. But I think people don't like the terms of that it arises. Like, the truth is, you have to follow specific diet, you have to follow the lunar calendar, you have to really watch where you exert yourself, and I'm not using that as a pun, but also. And so well, I mean, it's, I don't like talking about this, so it's like, it's kind of embarrassing, but it's, I'm trying to do it justice, right? I'm trying to be like a grown up about it. But yeah, you do, and you have to also be aware of like the influx of emotionality. This is not just me. I'm not just like, this isn't just like, I'm not saying something from me. I'm saying that from other people. Like, go read Sarah Condro's biography. I always say this. You want the OG Dakini? That's the OG Dakini. Or you can read Padmasambhava, two of his consorts, Yeshe Sogyal. She has like her whole like biography, so you can go read that. Like it's a as I said, like Tantra can be very confrontational. So just make sure that if, if that's what you choose to do, like you're aware of that power and energy and dominant force. I don't know whose hand went up first,
It
Monty or
was Monty's.
thank you, Solar. Monty, please go ahead.
I just have like a joke point to make. First off, you don't need to study space to be you don't need to be an astronaut to study space. Same thing with all practices. You can go and be a student of anything. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily engaging with it. As a matter of fact, if you did engage in, the study we were just talking about, just look at porn stars and how happy they are. How much they have to like dose themselves with like Viagra pills just to like get like make rent that week. Look at like how they end up like afterwards. It's I think anyone who actually engages carnally to that extent is like psycho. Sorry, I just had to make a stupid point.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Monty. Okay, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's that's actually just kind of a tie into what I was going to say before. Yeah, so I one thing that I found interesting about my experiences, which came again, sort of arose totally by accident, like is zero, I nothing I could do to avoid either situation, right? But it did give me, I guess, also in what I was able to do with it, with the experience after they happened. Um, it gave me a taste of, oh, I was like, I kind of see, I also, among these other things that I talked about before, I sort of understood the power of antinomian practices in this very visceral way too, because like I'm like, oh, these things that happened to me totally by accident, and they gave me this sort of surging of power that I can now exert control over, right? That, like I was just saying, like I that would have been an incredible time to execute some magic, like if I had had something on deck, right? um I could, like, what if I, this horrible thing that just happened to me totally by chance, out of my control, what if I actually sought that out, right? Like what if I did that again and again and again, and it sort of, it made clear to me how people can become drawn to that stuff, again in a more visceral way, than I'd experienced before. um I also did want to flag too that I have I again, not that we have to make the pivot now, but I'm also kind of interested in some of the, because it ties into the antinomianism, maybe some of the like political or ideological implications of something like, if not Kenny G's cosmology and ontology, things that are sort of downstream from that in contemporary left-hand path stuff. Also to kind of like maybe broaden the discussion in a way that will allow people to kind of, contribute if they didn't actually like read the book, which we changed it at super last minute. But I just wanted to flag that as like maybe something that we could talk about.
Okay, so I agree with everything you said. So we'll tackle it in reverse order, at least as I remember it. So, book club, it takes us a couple. I mean, Solar knows this because he's been there since book club day one. But it takes us like 3 spaces to get the book club, like to get the book really discussed. Maybe we'll do 2. Maybe this will just be like our primer space. I think that's totally okay. They're experimental. We've always said that. They're clearly speculative. So, if you haven't read the book, there was really no pressure. Yes, I did change it last minute. It was very, it just seemed right. It just felt right. It was like the universe was telling us. It was telling us yesterday. It was like read this book, and I was thinking it as you were typing, and I was like, yeah, we should switch the book, and I just didn't say anything. So I think it'll work out, and I think this was the right one. Um, Antinomianism. It's Look, the ideas are powerful in both ways. It's how to reconcile them. I think it's reconciled in your mind and in emptiness. That's how I think of it. But I'm not into fixation. I can acknowledge and appreciate that the garden is also the carnal ground. I recognize that that is true. I know it's true. That's in every sadhana, whether it describes the mind palace as full of gems or full of carnal things. And I'm not using carnal in a sexual way. I mean carnal as in like the carnal ground ideas. Whatever the mind palace is filled with, it's non-dual. So that's, it's already reconciled. You just don't fixate on it. You don't fixate on the the klipas or the demonic forces that arise, or any of the, even your own will. Like, there's a point where you give that up. You kind of say, you take refuge, you cultivate bodhicitta, and you kind of let it go into emptiness. But while you're doing the sadhana, of course, you're going to think of things are going to arise, all the ideas, all the, like, the day you've had, people you've encountered, words you've spoken, all of that, of course, it arises from your mind, and then you have to kind of let it go. And it's like a very ferocious, it can be not always. Obviously, if you practice a peaceful deity, then it's not going to be ferocious, but maybe it'll be confrontational, but not ferocious. But if you practice a ferocious deity, yeah, it's going to be very, very ferocious. So I'm not against it, obviously. I've obviously dabbled in left-hand path magic my whole life, pretty much. Not maybe not my whole life, but even the idea of magic, I think, has a very left-hand path idea. Like, I don't think of magic as being particularly, like, yes, there is obviously right-hand path magic in a way, but I kind of think of all magic as left-hand path. That's just me. But so I do understand, like, your attraction to, not Solar's, but I'm saying a person's, anyone's attraction to transgressive or antinomian things, because there is power in it. But just like there's power in all ideas, right? Or not all ideas, but powerful ideas, because it represents something else, right? It's also symbolic, if you want to call it that. So, or it represents, like, some kind of aggregation of consciousness, or some kind of thing we haven't resolved in ourselves, of course. I'm not even saying it's all reconcilable. It's all, like, it's all can be disentangled, disinterred, disaggregated. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that potentially you could think of it like that. But then we also have to live, like Monty brought it up, like, Buddhists, I think it was Monty. Buddhists get a bad rap. Someone brought it up. I apologize if it was someone else. I think it was Monty, though. But Buddhists get a bad rap for not wanting to. Yeah, yes, okay. So desire. But, like, the thing is that I'm interested in, like, this idea of New American Dharma, and, like, what is that? And even in Tantra, so I obviously come from that perspective, but I'm moving into a new, perhaps, framework of where I'm looking at it more New World, more Hapaboring. So what does that even mean? So that also means that we have to, as I was talking about, we have to kind of renegotiate those relationships and those treaties with things. So I just think non-dual. Just be non-dual. I think that's the much better way to be. I think if you're going to learn anything from Dharma, magic should be non-dual. It should be of the mind. It's a psychic aeon. It's not a magic aeon. Like, yes, there is magic in the aeon, obviously, but in my opinion, it's a psychic aeon. It's a much more pink. It's just that's what it is. It's not, like, I'm kind of like Solar in that way. Like, I was a dilettante with, like, certain kinds of, especially ritual magic. I find it so boring. Like, there's nothing that puts me to sleep faster than reading Crowley. Like, I'm serious. Like, I've tried. I find it boring. I'm just not interested in, like, yeah, if he talks about Kabbalah, obviously I'm all in. But, like, when he's talking about, like, doing your, like, the hands shit and all that, and, like, I do tantric dancing. And it's not like that. It's not dancing. It's like hand gestures, right? So for me, it's not weird. The idea is just like, I just am like, okay, I don't really get it, so it's boring. So that's more how I am. But I'm just saying, you don't have to be like me, but I'm just saying. Okay, Mike. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, I just want to comment on a few things. I know with Buddhism, especially, and with attachments, I feel like that's often exaggerated and misunderstood, that you just release all attachments. You're not supposed to have any attachments. And I've met people who take it to the extreme, and it gets to a point where they can't even exist in society because I'm not one person in particular who released all attachments, even to their family, to their parents. They just severed all attachments to have no attachments to anybody. Like, you need to have some attachments. It's about having, like, releasing non-necessary attachments. And I just wanted to clarify that, because I feel like that's like a subject that's often misunderstood among people in general, but among some Buddhist practitioners, and there's many practitioners who just give away everything. and live with no objects of possession. And that's an extreme behavior, and not something that I think anyone should necessarily do. You should have some attachments, just not if they're affecting you. Don't hold on to stuff that is no longer necessary. Um, and I just wanted to comment too on Jim talking about stuff that's boring. And this is one of my biggest ways of just navigating the world, I think. And this is kind of like my way of, I don't know, climbing the tree of life, the Kabbalah, where if something is boring to me, I often don't do it. And there's cases where that doesn't work, right? Like sometimes you kind of have to truck through things that are boring to gain something from it. But I'm very much of the belief of following your instinct, and often if something is boring, then maybe it's a waste of time, and maybe it'll be more entertaining in the future. Maybe it's just like not something that you should follow right now. And yeah, just following what like lights you up and what's interesting is a really good way of navigating where to go and how to work with whatever you're doing in life, whether it's your development or who knows.
I just want to say really quick, and then I'm going to let Monty and Solar go. But really quick, Mike, I agree with you. But I've also said this since I began podcasting, that Tantra, whatever you want to say Tantra is like the primordial system, maybe in my opinion. But regardless of what you think, it's a householder's path. It's very clear. It's very obvious. That's who the Dharanis were written for and by. Not monks. Householders. So this has sort of been like the governing, I would say that this idea of like that, using that framework, has been sort of overarching to the whole, every space, really. So not privileging like the ascetics or the black sorcerers. It's kind of like bringing it together in synthesis. Maybe not Tiferatic synthesis, but maybe something else. Maybe something new. Okay, sorry, Monty, please go ahead.
I just liked a lot of what Mike just said there. It's dowsing machines, how they help like find like buried treasure. It's basically like Scientology rods that allow you to like use oh God, what's it? Menasteric
The
oaths.
e-meter.
Oh yeah, the e-meter, but it's that you can like remote view through. And they're basically just sticks, and like your intuition can help you go and like find, like, your body naturally seeks out what it wants to find. Manifestation like is like a verb. It is something that happens. It is something you do. It is something that you create for yourself. The, you know, I keep harping on this, but it's like experience really is like the tree is laid out in front of you, and we're each individual beings. Our bodies are part of like the same like network, and it's important to carve out the path that was laid before you. And things that bore you, like people who have monotonous office jobs. Like I actually do have that Gen X. Like I feel bad for you because you just traded away your opportunity and like sold your like futures on happiness for something reliable. I mean, again, nowadays especially like reliable is good, but what I really it's now this is embarrassing, but just to go back to the whole what Mike said about Buddhists and like letting go of things and like not desiring. You need things to care about. You need connections to be. You may as well just become like a sociopathic hobo if you want to go and live the true like desire-free lifestyle. And it's embarrassing because I saw the new Demon Slayer movie in theaters the other day. it's, don't I swear I'm still cool. Don't be mad at me. But but yeah, anyway, so like the main character goes and kills like the main demon because he like enters complete flow state. He like doesn't harbor ill will or bad intentions, but he needs to cut your head off. And removing the like hatred from your heart, but still being able to complete a task is like that is what Buddhism is. Yeah, you're gonna wash the floor every day. You're gonna go and meditate all day. You're gonna have like a very like strict diet. but it's about like letting go of the things that like define you, like shedding all of your sins and becoming like pure being. But like pure beings care about things, and like so should you.
I saw Solar's hand up, but I will say really, really quick about desire. As I agree, like that was a really well described, Monty. I think, and I also think that like it's not like that. It's like desire is just a cause of things. It's not necessarily that it's like yeah, it's the root of suffering because it's the cause of things. But like, of course, we want connection. That's the whole point. Like the whole thing, and even in tantra, is like the bodhisattva vow. It's like you're saying, like, yeah, you're gonna come back and you're gonna help rebuild the world, whatever that is, and maybe that's a different process. Like I always say, I've talked about this several times. Solar talked about it in a different, like more like European framework, like the virtuous outlaw. It's very wuxia, right? Like Monty, you'll understand. It's very wuxia literature, very Zhonghu, right? Coming up from the rivers and the lakes, the subterranean grounds. And so, who are the Zhonghu? The wuxia characters are always the evil stars. They're always evil stars. Sha Shen, right? Star gods, reborn on this world. Not everyone's a star god. That's the reality. Because some people have better karma and some people have worse karma. So, but why are evil star gods reborn on this world? They're reborn to rectify their past karmas. So I actually believe this, like really strongly. I even believe it about myself. If you really want to know. So, anyway, yeah. Solar, sorry, please go ahead.
No, man. Um, yeah, so again, I certainly don't hold myself out as any kind of a Buddhist scholar or something like that, but it is funny to me, like, because again, I spent a lot of time just reading the Pali Canon. That was like my first after Evola, right? I'm like, oh, I should actually go read the Pali Canon. All right. Um, there's this funny conflation that happens, I think, at like surface level Buddhism with the point is non-identification with things, right? And again, I'm not discounting the sort of like deeper ontological layer of Buddhist thought, right? Like that's definitely there as far as like non-self, but certainly at a practical level and certainly at the level of like, I don't know, the person you're probably talking to, like what in Mike's example, right? The idea is to when you feel a compulsion, you feel a desire, you find yourself situated in a social nexus, right? Within like relationships, friends, family, things like that, right? Like it's not as it's Buddha's actually the historical Buddha in the Pali Canon is actually pretty explicit, right? Like you actually do have like family dharma. You still have your like obligations, you still have the things like that, right? But the point is to, at a sort of fundamental absolute level, to disidentify with your position, right? With those even like relationships with those desires. So to feel like something, right? If you're someone slights you and you react, you feel anger or resentment or whatever, like rising up within you, it's to train yourself to say like those aren't me, like that is not, there's not an I to whom this is happening, that, and just to basically to train yourself to watch those experiences, to watch those feelings, right? Realize how they arise, right? Like it's all these like stock phrases in Pali, right, that you get used to hearing or in translation, you watch them arise, you say like, where are they located, right? And just by that sort of passive, disinterested, distanced observation, you see that there, you just let them dissolve, right? And that's like a fundamental sort of like almost a never ending like key part of the training, right? Until you reach the level where yes, eventually, you presumably like don't even experience those things at all, right? But like again, for those of us who are not we're not bodhisattvas, right? We're not arahats. So it's that. It's not trying to say like, oh, I just like fuck you, mom and dad, or whatever. Like clearly there's something else going on. There is all I'm saying, right? Um, I'll leave it there for now.
No, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. See, where Tantra would sort of change it, it wouldn't be about cutting per se. It would be about the using that thing in the sadhana and recognizing it. But I agree, non-attachment. That is the point. But also like letting it go, self-combusting it in your own mind, using the words as the vehicle to sort of carry the state through. I agree with all that. It makes sense to me. It makes sense in a tantric way. Just we go about it very differently, right? And it's not really different. It's just using the tools to get us to the same place.
Sorry, I remember what I was going to say about the ceremonial magic stuff. Sorry, real quick, if I could jump back in. So similarly, actually, I think in a way to the sort of like more standardized aesthetic practices that we're sort of at least somewhat familiar with from our sort of Western insight into like the Buddhist monastic life or something like that. Um, I see these things, and also from my own experience when I was surrounded by the like Torah like observant Jewish community in New York. Um, I think there's all these things in a certain way are like it's you're setting up schools, right? Not necessarily schools in the sense of like trying to download specific abstract bits of information like that's definitely a part of it in all three of those things, but whether like you're living by vow, right? Which you can do as a layperson too, right? Lay people take vows in Buddhism. um Whether you're studying the sort of like traditional ceremonial practices and the sort of theoretical foundation through kind of Golden Dawn, Telema, et cetera, right? Um, I think that like for me anyway, and again, I'm certainly not like a perfect practitioner of my own advice, what I'm about to say. But to me, there does seem to be some value in it, even if it's not something that like speaks to you. It's like, okay, Crowley is telling you to do things almost by rote, right? He's developed this system, and at the end of the day, he's trying to call attention to certain things. He's trying to develop certain sensitivities. He's trying to encourage you a certain modes of associative thinking, et cetera, right? And so even if you're like, I don't want to do that, or even if you're like, this isn't the system for me or something, the way I approach it personally is like, what can I kind of learn about what he's pointing at, right? So even if this isn't a question of I have to memorize the invoking and banishing different directions for all of my pentagram rituals, right? Like which corner do I start at and which direction do I go for each element, right? Like even if that's ultimately not like the beginning and end of like what I'm trying to do, it's like, okay, well, what is he actually getting at? What is he trying to instill in the pupil here? And is it possible for me to extract something usable, something meaningful, some way that I can improve myself and better my practice, even if it's not exact, like even if I don't plan on doing these incredibly elaborate like ceremonial practices on a regular basis, or even at all, right? I think that that type of an analysis is as you approach a system can be good, especially if you then also have like points of experience or points of contact with people who do work within those systems, right? So like to bring it back to my personal life example, right? Like I'm surrounded by all these ultra orthodox Jews, quote unquote. Um, Let me see what the system produces and what aspects of that, of how these people live, how they conceive of the world, move through the world, all that shit, right? Are there any bits of this that I like for myself? And if I can identify those things, then I can go back to the system and say, what about this system inculcates certain values, certain abilities, whatever, right? And like, so that's how I approach those types of things, even if, yeah, I'm not trying to be a Crowleyite magician or an ultra Orthodox Jew.
No, I agree with everything you said. I agree with all of that. You have. I wasn't try. I was not trying to be flippant about ritual magic or Crowley. Like I cut my teeth on Agrippa. I played with the Keys of Solomon for many years. I totally get it. Like I get the rote practices, and I understand that there's Nyandro. There's even a Christian's kind of Nyandro. Like you can do Loyola, or you can do Saint Augustine. Like there's so many, right? So the reality is like I agree, like you should be learning like directionalities, you should be learning elements. It's just like for me, because I think tantra is like a little superior or whatever, I I think dharma is superior, is that I look at it more like that's the idea is much more flexible, so we're already flexible, but then it's like we're talking about it more what we would say is primordial level, right? Like doing the elemental like disaggregations with your Georgie, like and you're spinning it like in your mind, and you're doing like your the invocation for fire. Okay, you're doing that heatless fire, uh, you know, clarityless water, whatever, clarityless water, um, earth without aggregation, air without contamination. So you're doing like all the four things, and then you're bringing it together into the fifth, into the sound, space, self combust. Okay, well that makes sense. That's why I find it boring. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't find it boring for its own sake. I find it boring because I already do something similar. And I would look at that maybe more completely. But I agree. And that's the other thing. That is why I've been like sort of recording on Rejects more, is because I wanted to meet like some of these Typhonian and these OTO guys, because I want to see like what Solar's saying, like the fruits of their system. I want to encounter them like from their own words also. So yeah, I agree. That's a very valuable sort of you could call it magical ethnography. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that that's a very important thing, and I think that's also what we do in a way, is like we're discursive together and sort of vulnerable together in a way, and that sort of makes it. We can see things. I think a more. It certainly gives me more humility. Anyways, speaking of humility, I'm sorry, Joshua. Please go ahead. You've had your hand up forever.
Nah, dude, as usual, it works out perfectly because I had a chance to smoke a bowl. I also had an epiphany I wanted to share. Had a funny joke. So, like, there's fruit. So, anyway, you mentioned the keys of Solomon, and immediately, as the grandpa, I was like, "Oh yeah, before Sonny Boy gets the keys to the Merkaba, I got to teach him how to drive, right?" And not that I'm teaching you. I'm just saying, like, as a grandpa, I was like thinking of the keys to the car, because I'm always dealing with kids at work. And then I even gave one a driving manual today. But for me, that was just what was on my mind. And then I was thinking of there's this part in the Bible that seems to be like a mystery, you know, um, when it's talking about in Matthew 19:24, it says, "And again, I say unto you, it is easier for a camel," which is Gimel, one of the paths to Tipperet I mentioned earlier. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. And so we were talking about like divesting yourself of all your values and valuables and stuff like that. And here Ayin was the last of that sequence, meaning I. So we have camel and I here. Zayn could be the needle. So I was wondering if this phrase or this series of letters could be like the whole meaning behind this parable that seems to be so cryptic and hard to understand. And so like you can't buy your way into heaven. You kind of, and this was almost like the Gnostic interpretation, is that you learn your way into heaven almost. But of course, there's the gift of salvation, which is the right hand path, right? But before that existed, there was the left-hand path only, and so they only had like that certain pattern to follow. So I appreciate the discussion we've been having on the Orthodox Judaic stuff, because it's really awesome. And which brings me to my one of the final points was that the Hebrew language, from my understanding, seems to come from the stars themselves. That some of the constellations do, in fact, kind of are analogous to the alphabet, which means they are inherently then analogous to the 22 paths on the tree. So I think this, and that one quote I put here as well. I promise to schizo. It'll end here in a moment. And it is from Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. Well, kings wear crown, right? So, and with the sun out, you can't see the logos, which is the stars, right? So, um, it is the glory of God. In other words, he uses the sun to conceal the night and to conceal the stars, because they're already there, right? Like we mentioned. So he conceals them, and so only the learned, or those who are associating with the twilight language, as it were, and it's the kings who search out the matter, right? So if you possess the crown, if you have done that, then now you are that's part of your inheritance then, is to be given wisdom, right? So, or whatever. And the final thing was maybe from something that I can't remember who said what, but there was something there about fear maybe. And or wait, no, it was a different emotion, but it reminded me of the litany of fear from Dune. uh, to examine that emotion and let it flow and pass over you. I think it was Solar maybe this was talking about this. And so it reminded me of the litany of fear, because that's what Moadib learns from the Bene Gesserit, and he says, to turn his eyeing again, inward, to see the fear and to allow it to pass over, and to examine it, and that he would remain afterwards, right? Um, and so that reminds me of the verse Proverbs 1:7. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So so imagine a Moadib moment. Fear is the beginning, but after it passes, now wisdom and insight can come, right? So anyway, because you're no longer engaged with that like parasympathetic nervous system, like you've conquered that reptile brain kind of reaction, maybe. So anyway, just wanted to mention those things. Thanks so much.
I know Solar has his hand up. I'm just going really, really quick. So the way you conquer untamed wisdom is through what you said, Joshua, is through single pointedness, but it's single pointed non-duality. So it's the 10 directions in one, like you see Kenneth Grant talking about Kether and Malkuth and Kether. It comes up every chapter, at least at the beginning of the front of the book, for the first 5 chapters. It is that. So that is a way, that's what Padmasambhava, that's how he conquered Chamunda. He conquered the primordial grandmother because he told her, you're non-dual, and she's like, oh yeah, shit, I am non-dual. So anyways, I just wanted to say that. Anyway, Sawyer, please go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't quite totally come together, but what you were saying about the parable from Matthew and Gimel just kind of reminded me of something. Just because again, it gives an opportunity to circle back to something in the book. Um, yeah, so Kenny G associates, and again, this kind of goes back to his cosmology and his version of Kabbalah. So he associates Gimel, the third letter, with essentially the phase of the daughter who has sorry for just being like physical, but it's necessary in this case. Basically, the pubescent virgin girl who has begun to menstruate but is still a virgin, right? Um, and also like Ein, he associates very heavily with essentially the eye, but meaning the shadow eye, i.e. like the womb or the vulva, etc. Right? That's like that's like a very key like attribution that he's constantly making reference to, right? And also, and this is I think maybe I don't know how deep this goes back into Hebrew. It's definitely like a modern thing. So Zion as the letter Z is the equivalent in Hebrew of like the sexual how like in English we say like the D to reference like the dick, the phallus, right? So Zion is that for visual reasons, presumably, among others. And Grant, for the record, has a very, very curious sort of etymology of Zion that goes in the other direction, associating it with something feminine as well, and again tied to this way that Ayin works in his sort of yeah, his understanding of the Hebrew language, which is maybe a little different. But you can say that if we look at Gimel as being that sort of the sort of like virginal priestess or oracular daughter sort of archetype, right? And then if we pair that with the Zion, right, as like the phallus, right? Um, Again, it's rather than taking that the crude direction, once the virgin once the sort of virginal daughter becomes sexually engaged in some way, she is discharging her potential, right? She's kind of like engaging on a sort of necessary transformation or permutation, but in a certain sense, like you're only again just kind of because of the exclusive and non-reversible status of the virgin and the sort of like sacral tension involved in that status, either for ritual purposes or just socially in general, right? Thematically or conceptually, we might understand this as a sort of willing forfeiture by letting the Sein pass through the Ein, so to speak, right? A willing forfeiture of status and potential, um, along to allow for further sort of manifestation or further development, right? And so in trying to interpret then like he's saying like it's easier, or basically calling attention to that vis-a-vis the rich man, right? Because like, what does wealth allow you to do, right? Like, wealth in a certain sense is liability, right? Especially in the age before, like, digital bookkeeping and things like that, right? If you were a rich man, well, you're just carrying around what, sacks of gold and gems and spices and shit. Like, on one sense, that's a burden, but what it is power, right? It's potential that can then be converted, exchanged. It allows you to execute in the world, right? And so for the rich man to progress, he has to be willing to, one, in a spiritual sense, kind of the obvious sense, right? Like, let go of the attachment to the potential and, give away the stuff like that. But even maybe more generally, there's kind of this interesting sense in which we have to allow the power and potential to flow from us, that there's something, again, sort of stultifying and petrifying ultimately about the sort of constant accumulation of potential that is thwarted, that isn't allowed um proper, like, outflow. Does that make sense? Right? If we look at this kind of either magically or sort of initiatically, right? That there's nothing necessarily wrong with the wealth per se, but attachment to that versus attachment to what can be developed through the cultivation of that power, is a mistake, right? And that's a hurdle to one's development.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think that was a really axial point that Solar said. Like the potentiality of wealth, whatever that is, both for the individual and for greater purpose. I think that's something really. I like that. So, but I also want to say about the virginal daughter, like that obviously exists in Tantra. We've discussed this. We had a whole series on this. But the Kumari, right? Like this still exists in Nepal. It's a girl, they're like a premenstrual. She's the goddess for a year. She's not really the goddess, and like people understand it. The yoginis come to her, but they interact with her in subtle, subtle ways. Subtle ways. So subtle that it takes someone who's like a mage, like a very advanced upasaka, to understand what she's saying. And she might not say it. It might be in a glance. It might be in a touch. It might be a point, a gesture. It's so subtle, but it's in our perception. So that's why I think it's somewhat hard to map the daughter. In many ways, she's empty because it is love. And what it kind of love is it? Well, there are many kinds, but it should be proximal to the truth. So whatever that means is like something that I'm still thinking about. But yes, so obviously he's a nexus point. I think that's what we were saying at the beginning. He's a nexus point for many of these ideas. Like you can see, there's a deep tantric layer to the entire book. I mean, you can just parallel all the characters, like right one to one back into Tantra, like no problem. You can reabsorb almost the whole thing, add a little medieval Kabbalah. You're good to go. Maybe add a little Crowley here and there. Okay. But you could reabsorb all the things back into their original episodes. But it's interesting that they're all coming together. And it's interesting that we're at such a time that we're on the internet, we're in a space on an app called X, obviously the 10 and the 11, transcending time and space, coming from all over the world, speaking to each other, often as I'd like to say, New Worlders or Hyperboreans. And we're sort of looking at the cultural landscape of American metamagic. I think that's fair to say. And so we're kind of an access point in a way simply through having the discussion, and it also helps, perhaps maybe you could say even in a small way, disaggregate some of his work, because we're able to come from all the different perspectives and sort of say, this is what we think of it, this is more of the traditionalist ideas, this is why. I think in that way that this is the true time, maybe you could say. I don't know. I like to think of myself as like a dragon of the apocalypse. So I like to think of us as being. Well, I'm kidding, Joshua. Obviously, sort of, sort of. Anyways, okay. I'm sorry, Joshua. Go ahead and say your point. I know you've had your hand up forever.
That's cool, dude. So as you guys were talking about the the Virgo symbolism, which we're in that sign, so I find this whole discussion very fitting, because what I have read, I've read a lot of things in the text now that I'll talk about next time. But one of the things I did want to discuss is how the veil in the temple of Yahweh was also analogous to this, even though that the center of the Holy of Holies is anatomically associated with the center of the head, like the pineal gland. Um, However, the Holy of Holies veil was kind of seen as this like a same type of hymen symbolism. And in fact, Mother Mary, the mother of Christ, was said to have, in the Orthodox Church, they teach that she wove the veil herself. She like worked in the temple, and her part of her labor, as it was to construct this veil. So, and then she bore Christ, right, as a first fruit. So there's something very unique about the firstborn, because they're the first to be crowned. And so when you are birthed, it's called crowning, when your head breaches that veil, as it were. And so there's like this concept of first fruits, and that's one of the feasts actually in Judaism. It's I think the second, or maybe the third. It's one of the first anyway in spring, and so Christ is kind of referred to as that first fruits type symbolism as well. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because the priests were who became the firstborn, rather, or who became the priests, I think. So there was a blessing or an anointing of sorts associated with this firstborn criteria. So thank you for letting me weave on that.
Solar, please go ahead. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah, no. And this is definitely isn't accidental, and I do want to maybe specifically for Joshua, because you work more closely with like more sort of like biblical ideas, which is gonna echo Crowley that much more. You might be interested in circling back to Kenny G's like first book in his whole run, the Magical Revival, which again it sticks more closely to his sort of version of Crowley, but anyway, I think you'll find a lot in there that whatever. I just wanted to cite the kind of interesting parallel here. So in the same way that in this, because the sort of triune God is one, so to speak, in a sense, you have God impregnating his mother, right, and then rending the veil through birth, and that's a direct, again, as Mr. Grant would kind of present things. That's this sort of direct parallel, or a sort of echo of this primordial Typhonian tradition, in which you have Set essentially impregnating his mother Typhon, and then cutting himself out, emerging from the womb as the sort of like first distinct sort of entity. It's sort of this sort of like recursive circular mythos of sort of creation, and the sort of rendering of veil of hymen, in order again with sort of like emphasis on the sort of mysterious, chaotic um, uh, power of birth giving. But again, sort of like with this idea of sort of chaotic, sort of self begetting, divine self begetting, that I find very interesting. Anyway.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you. The one last detail I forgot to mention, and thank you. I wrote that book down, by the way. Um, but the one of the parts of this book was about the light or non-light or something like that, and it reminded me of what we were talking about a moment ago. But the light and the dark that occurs during the union of sperm and ovum, I think it's a zinc-based reaction, but it produces a spark of light within the darkness. So the dark eye, or that womb area, as well as the thunderbolt, right, and the descent of all the down the path of the tree and all that. So I think this kind of maybe has some type of importance here, although I can't seem to find the words.
Solar, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Yeah, so there's actually this kind of interesting thing. Again, Grant is developing Crowley's understanding of like the transition between the Aeon of Isis and the Aeon of Horus. The key distinction between those two aeons is that allegedly, right? This is the whole like guys sitting around in chairs thinking big thoughts. But the idea of the Aeon of Isis existed in the phase where humankind didn't fully understand the male role in the reproductive cycle or the reproductive process, and so the woman was elevated. Patriarchy didn't exist because essentially, like, patrilineal descent wasn't understood at all, right? So women, yeah, I mean, they were having sex, obviously, but they didn't understand the male contribution. And so in this case, and I'm trying to get at the sort of the light bit in the pre-Osirian, in the pre sort of patriarchy in this kind of mythology, the act of giving birth, both physically as well as in this cosmological sense, was seen as a fundamentally dark or chaotic process, because the woman and the womb was seen to have this kind of this power to bring something unmanifest, something non-being into the world of being, right? And so for Kenny G, he sees primal or this sort of primitive man's understanding of the woman as constituting this sort of weird, spooky, like magical sort of portal. Again, not to get too graphic, but this sort of doorway into the abyssal realm of non-manifestation, right? And so there's something really interesting when you're saying, you're citing this just kind of materialist fact, right? As we've been able to see, the zinc reaction, it produces this burst of light. That's kind of a nice contrast to that, right? Since we obviously do understand, right? The sort of male contribution to conception, and procreation as such, it does involve light, it does involve the male, right? The sort of symbology of that lines up, right? And so Kenny G is trying to sort of recreate, um, or really just like reconstitute an understanding of this, that sort of, it's not that we're pretending that we don't understand those things, but really trying to contrast this with the sort of like principal magical dark chthonic chaotic role of the mother, the birthing mother of primitive man, right?
I'm gonna go really quick. I agree with all that. That was great, Solar. Like really great. A plus, gold star, 10 times, 7 times over, 777. It's so sick to me, kind of like this is my initial. This is just me like being reactive, but this is like it's so weird, like the framing of it. But I'll teach you Tantra one. I'm not teaching Solar, but I'm not teaching anyone. We're just gonna learn something all together. So for the first time, we'll say speculatively. The the mother and the father are the polarities. The son resolves the polarities of the mother and the father. The daughter resolves the polarities of the son because he is the many and the one, the diamond thunder one, right? So yeah, I agree. Okay, he bursts out from the yoni. The yoni is the gateway. Yeah, this all makes sense in a tantric cosmology, like one to one, the triangle, everything, like all of it, upward, downward. Okay, but it's all empty at the same time. So like you again don't be fixed to his mythology, but I think it's an interesting way to explore, as Solar said, the ideas within it. But I agree that it's, for me, there's something a little bit, I like it to look at it more on non-dual, and maybe that's how we'll look at it next week. Okay, Solar, if you want to go with me right now, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll go just real quick. And again, this comes back to the sort of like ambivalence of Grant, right? So on one hand, he's making tremendous use of like very, very basic physiological polarities, right? Male, female. I mean, he's downstream from Crowley, so you know what you're in for, right? But then on the other hand, he very oddly locates a kind of synthesis, or a he essentially places non-duality into the pole of non-manifestation, right? And that's kind of one of the things I was trying to get at earlier in the space, where I said there are these sort of strange unresolved tensions, where by elevating the sort of world of chaos, the world of non-manifestation in this Gnostic way. In this, it's sort of an imbalancing of the polarity, saying this thing was primary, this thing is quote unquote more real, where the world of materiality, the world of light, is the world of illusion. He is also thinking non-dually, and obviously he's very, very influenced by Advaita and other things too. So it's no surprise. But he puts that into the realm of chaos. So the sort of the world of non-being is simultaneously one of the two poles, and especially with how heavily he emphasizes the feminine aspect of all of this, like we've been kind of getting out with the yoni and stuff. So it's a pole, but it simultaneously contains its own resolution in a way that it's intriguing to me. I don't fully understand it, but like again, just kind of thinking through it, just sort of piggybacking on what you were saying, it doesn't feel totally clean in that understanding of it, because like again, the point is synthesis, the point is resolution, the point is non-dual transcendence. And so binding that up within something that you're also using as one of the two poles of your sort of duality, I don't know, there's more to unpack there, both I think for us and maybe for Kenny G himself. So
Two things really quick, and then I'll let Monty go. I know he had his hand up. As Kenny G was a fucking funny bar, I'll give you that. So good job on that. Also, the concert resolves all paradox, yo. So like, yeah, there is a paradox, and it is resolved, at least in a tantric way. Like the peg, he is the sun, but he also resolves like the paradox of the yoni, which is like to turn the spaces in between, the layers, the densities, the aggregations. But it's not really of his mother, it's really of the world of Maya. So, like, you could say it's of his mother, but is it his mother? Nah, I wouldn't say that. Maybe some people would. Like the Gnostics love their their very weird, complicated family situations. This just goes a little too far for me, but, I understand what they're talking about. Sorry, Monty, please go ahead.
Oh no, it's so I apologize. I haven't read the book, but just something that Solar was mentioning earlier about how like the like resolving that like dialectic between the man and woman. Like man, this is a polio point. That woman creates life, and man has been chasing the euphoria, the ecstasy, the in uh, man tries to future-proof himself in the way that women don't have to, by creating art, by building cities, by building civilizations. And the dialectic between man and woman is resolved in the sense of each of them are perpetuating a continuing life, and it's like this helix spiral of supporting each other. And I think that that's something that I don't know. I resonate really deeply with. I know it's probably a groan, but at the same time, I have a hard time. I have a hard time denying that. Like that's truly like the dance of the sexes, and like that's why Battle of the Sexes will never go away. But at least in like the long term scheme of things, it's like that is the delicate dance that like makes like which makes us make me believe that we are like made in God's creation, because we are capable of doing this like highly complex dance that no other species can. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
I agree with all of that, Monty. I think it's about being generative. I think it's about aeon of complements, not aeon of opposites. And I think it's also about like, yeah, there'll never be a resolution of the battle between the sexes, but there is like a way. And I also think it's I don't know, maybe I'm telling on myself. I know I was accused of being a baddie in a funny way by someone in this chat, maybe Seth. But I do kind of think it is like the Aeon of the Reform baddie. And maybe that, there's what's wrong with that? Maybe it's not the perfect version of the times past. But maybe it's like someone who chooses something different, whatever that is. So, I don't know. I think that for me, that's like I guess an overarching theme that I've been thinking about and probably discussing in my own way. So, yeah, Joshua, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you have actually, because the Aeon of the Daughter kind of reminds me of something I read in his, maybe it was like page 34. So it was like the son becomes the daughter or something like that. And then, of course, the daughter's purpose was then to bear a son. So it's almost like a dielectric, off on, or magnetic receptive, or transmitting, however you want to look at it, yin yang. But I think it's like a switch that flips every so often. It's like one begets the other. They almost like swap roles from time to time, because without Mary, there would be no Christ, for instance, right? And so we know that in order for Mary to even happen, there had to be like a certain lineage and generations, and that's outlined in, I think, in Luke and Matthew, maybe. But and of course, there's numbers involved. 42 generations.
Look, I do not like the overt synthesis between them. I think that the layers have deeper meanings. That's me. So I like them as like individual archetypes or characters that come together in synthesis, and whatever that means, yesodic or Tipperatic, resolution or synthesis together. But I don't think that they're inherently the same. But I do agree that there is a pole switch. Now, what does that exactly entail? I think I laid out a Kabbalistic and Tantric cosmology of why that is. But to put it briefly, I guess it is more in the principle for me. Gevra and Hesed coming together in synthesis and resolution. Both. Okay, yes, Solar, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and I actually am. I hope we circle back and end up covering the Crowley book as well, which I haven't fully finished reading, but I've read most of it, and I've read a fair amount of this other stuff at this point. So, um, because again, I think in that too, there's something that maps. I don't want to say one to one, but basically feels as one to one as you can get with something like this, with sort of the best of the sort of instructions that I've received in Dzogchen, right? Um, if not that you can really break these things apart in a sort of fundamental way, but if you want to talk about emptiness or void and clear light, um if you, at least again playing it fast and loose for a second here, if you understand hadit as this sort of like illuminating, like I is an like EYE, right? The sort of like the light of consciousness. And if you understand Nuit, the goddess of the night sky, of the void, of empty space, right? What's happening there when they come into union, it's the is there's a it's not even just a synthesis, but there's a mutual self-recognition, right? And which tracks into like practical like instructions, right? So you're understanding that like you that the like for instance like the phenomenal world as you're experiencing it is actually coming to exist through the clear light of consciousness in the empty space of mind, right? And it's understanding that these two things aren't actually separable, right? That they're one and the same. The fundamentally they're sort of like one and the same, right? We're sort of like picking at different aspects of something that can't fundamentally be separated. And I feel like there's a certain clarity there and a map there that then gets a little bit messier when we like try to do the grant stuff. Now again, it's not that he doesn't like get that. He's very much like he's like, as he understands it, he's doing Crowley more than Crowley, right? um but I also think that gets a little bit confusing when we start trying to map this onto like every mythological structure ever, because we start, like again, Nuit as the sort of Egyptian netter, she has properties, right, of the goddess of empty night sky, void, all of that stuff. That maps very well onto the kind of like empty sort of space, the sort of non-space of consciousness, right? But then once we start talking about, 14-year-old Hebrew girls, right, living under Roman occupation, then it sort of, because it's so material and so sort of biological. I'm not saying that like you can't make the themes of the concepts work, but for me it loses some of the, again, just like some of the clarity. I'm not saying that it's like bad to make those equations. Obviously Kenny G goes buck fucking wild equating different like mythological cycles and structures together from Africa and, the quote unquote Orient, etc. But yeah, just for me, I start to get a little bit lost, the farther away I get from something that I can make sense of in terms of my own practice and experience, but then also that yeah, that has the kind of clarity of Crowley, dare I say, or the sort of Buddhist conception, as I understand it.
That was very good, Brother Solar. Thank you so much. I'll let Joshua go really quick, but I want to say this. I don't, for me, this is just me, and I'm not correcting anyone. I'm not correcting Solar or anyone, or Kenny G even. But I don't like the conflation of void with emptiness. Those are two different things. Void is closely related to Akasha, space. That's how we would understand it. It's not necessarily the same thing, right? Like, yes, but also distinct. Yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to take my medication earlier, so when I started talking, I lost my voice. But anyway, so but yeah, I totally understand your point, Solar. And I would add to it too that, but I would also think that maybe Mary in this could also represent like the High Priestess. So as a tarot card, to add like clarity, but maybe at that point she's a little older. Who knows? But nevertheless, the High Priestess is sitting in her lap. She has the Torah, which is the logos, and so and even with the Nuit depiction, if the logos comes from the stars, then it does the logos not come from Nuit in a similar sense? So I think it's still there. It's just that through this twilight language, it's like trying to see through water, like that scripture talks about how we all see through a glass darkly. But then of course, when epiphany occurs, we get that enlightenment and the connections become apparent or whatever. So I just argue that maybe they are there, it's just hard to find.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I have a point about Nui, but I'm gonna let Solar go first.
No, I was actually well, it sounds like maybe related to what you were going to say. Because I selfishly, I would actually love to just ask if you could expand a little bit more on the distinction between sort of void and emptiness. Not just maybe for my own benefit, but again, a lot of like I think Western esotericists or magicians kind of play it fast and loose with those types of distinctions and maybe bring in concepts that don't necessarily map super well onto the kind of like either Buddhist or um, subcontinental understanding of that, right? And I just think it would be perhaps helpful to hear a little bit more about those differences.
I'll do the best I can. I can't promise anything. Don't have high expectations, but I'll say so. Vacuity space. So that's an often used translation for sort of pristine awareness or rigpa. You'll hear that vacuity space, but it can also be a translation of void or emptiness. So those things can be used interchangeably, but void and emptiness aren't really interchangeable. Why is that? Void, as I said, vacuity space. It's like the drawing in of something. But as you both said, Joshua and you, Solar, that light does occur in emptiness. Light does occur in darkness. That's a very important. That's the first principle in Buddhism, really. Like we have karmic connections, just like we talked about with desire. We have karmic connections, whether we acknowledge it or not. That's part of the conquest of ignorance, is the recognition that we do have karmic obligations, not just to ourselves, but to each other. And I feel very strongly about this personally. So void would represent like a kind of negation of those things. It would kind of bring you into self. But what is the self? The self is also empty. So you have to kind of let it go. So it kind of is a resolution of the paradox, the self-combusting star. Because what happens? It reforms. The logos, the word, the bija reforms. Just because you self-combusted it in your mind, it's still there. You're still carrying it with you. Your sadhana's over. So I think that there's a resolution in practice, more than perhaps a resolution in mythological terms. But maybe that's just my opinion. Yes, Joshua, and I hope that was a sufficient explanation. Okay, I got a black card. Okay, awesome. Joshua, please go ahead.
Oh, I had a lingering thought from earlier I wanted to mention regarding, maybe it was Mike that said something about men and women and their differences. And it was reminding me of the old axiom, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or whatever. But then I started thinking about that, and I was like, oh, well, so you got your numbers there too, 2 and 3 and 3 and 2, depending on which is taking the lead in the dance of their orbits, right? Because we know that Venus has an 8-year orbit that forms a 5-petal star around the Earth, or Sun rather. Excuse me. Well, actually, maybe it is around the Earth, but at any rate, Mars has its own orbit as well, right? And so they have like a dance, and so I kind of think of it that way as well. But the union of copper and iron is kind of unnatural because I don't, I can't think of any alloys that are that. So maybe they're not naturally able to be melded, but through some effort, whatever that is, that amalgamation can occur. And so that maybe the Vajra, could be an example of this where that potential is achieved and maybe captured in a way. And but anyway, I just wanted to weave a little bit on Mars and Venus and maybe how the planetary elements themselves can maybe lend some insight to the union discussion we were having.
I think to look at the whole tree as a kind of you have to look at each sort of dialectical relationship. It's not just between Mercury and Venus, Mars and Jupiter, Saturn and Neptune. It's like it's all of them. It's understanding like all of, like there's 3 levels, you could say. I know that there's 4, but we're saying 3 for right now. There are 3 levels of reality, you could say. This is a very Buddhist idea anyway. So you're resolving at 3 levels of reality. But it's internal, meaning mind, it's biological, and it's secret. What is secret? Well, I can't tell you that. But you can understand that as a deeper kind of process of a kind of Dathic experience, just like Kenny G, Toro Solar's nickname. That is what the kind of secret layer is. It's kind of like the Dathic processes. So, yes, Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, you just Joshua, and then you just kind of reminded me of something. So there's this kind of strange thing, right? So Set Horus is taken as like both like archetypical of the sort of like twin motif, but also okay. So there's this. I don't want to sound like too like esoteric within any given system, but I think Crowley kind of hints at this. Kenny G like develops it more. I've heard it from like Setian sources as well. So there's this idea that even though they're on sort of the surface level, they're presented as twins, right? In the kind of classic framing of the mythos. There's also the sense in which sort of Set is primary. He's not just the firstborn, but he's kind of the only. And actually, Horus in a certain framing can be considered a ka of Set. So, and again, without getting kind of into Egyptian soulcraft and stuff like that, you can see. So Set is he is this sort of like infinite or unbounded, but a sort of unmanifest shadow or non-dual potential, right? And the ka is a bounded sort of creation of the self, and in this case of Set. So the idea is that it's not as though he's a subset, he's not wholly distinct, but sort of like Horus is the sort of phallic male bounded sort of rationality. He's a sort of sub creation of Set, that's sort of created according to certain ideal strictures and for a sort of specific purpose, in this case to sort of impose a certain sort of solar order and regularity upon further like spheres of manifestation, creation, the world, etc., right? And so there's a sense in which in doing this, by essentially giving himself, I know it's getting kind of confusing, by sort of manifesting or creating, giving birth to Horus as the sort of male principle, he is intrinsically, you could say, like assuming the female aspect, right? But that's really kind of a false dichotomy, because like they're really, these are he's identical with Horus. Like Horus is a part of him, is a creation of him, and in that sense, Set as the sort of prototypical sort of child figure is at a more fundamental ontological level, is actually hermaphroditic, or I guess you could say it would be most accurate to say he's like completely like he has no sort of gender assignment, because even that would be sort of the sort of a reification, a densification, right? Constraints or categorization that's put on something that is sort of beyond, that defies all constraints, so to speak, right? So there, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's this sort of apparent bifurcation, this apparent differentiation, in this case of gender, sex, where we're assigning non-manifestation to this sort of female, and solar manifestation, male principle to Hadit, to Horus, etc. Right? But since these things are sort of fundamentally in union, they're fundamentally identical with each other. Nuit and Hadit come to recognize each other, as one in synthesis. In that sense, yeah. Does that? I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. I just have to relate it quickly to tantric astrology because that's really the way I look at it, and I think it's useful to hear for people to hear sort of the how similar it is. So Rahu Ketu, it's basically the idea. It's like the dragon and his tail, the manifestation and the smoke, the sin, the tamas, the the desire to be unmanifest, and the desire also of the physical body to stay within manifest reality. But Rahu really is he is the king of space, right? Like he is Rahu Latsa. He is the king of space, the king of the 9 planets. So, but he himself is only he's a Bhumi of the 10th level, like a Bodhisattva, but he's not quite a Buddha yet in like a more fundamental way to think. He's still working on it. Because why? Because he is the king of the desire world as well. So it's like, it's like what Solar was saying. It's like the tension between the polarities. Like we'd never take it as, very rarely is it taken as like very strictly hermaphroditic. We would always understand it as like even the dakinis. That's a great example. When they're like nude and look sexual, yes, there is a sexual component to it, but it's post-conceptual. But they're still a woman. So that's how I'm just saying that's how we would understand it. Like it's not like maybe there is a bit of self-identification with some practices. I don't do those things, but some people, like I've heard other people refer to it and discuss it in sadhana. So I understand, like I get it. There's like a deeper meta level, maybe the secret inner level. But in reality, it's like the distinctions are still important, especially because I look at things very iconographically. Like I like the material form of things because it gives me the contour of what the ideas. So for me, that's very important. It's like how Solar can listen to the audio. I need to see the text. Like for me, that's much more fundamental to my understanding. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's probably worse, but it's just an interesting difference, right? Anyways, I'm sorry, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciated that, Solar, and it reminded me something when you were talking about Set, but he's the firstborn, and again, I got to thinking. I was like, wow, there's an interesting pattern in the Bible too, because the firstborn was Cain, right? The firstborn was Esau, in a sense, right? Because he wrestled his way out, and so that's a very interesting pattern to go back and analyze now for me. And so the firstborn, I think, were supposed to become priests, and so if you look at the number of commandments that most everybody would be following if they're just doing the feast days or whatever and observing the Sabbath, then they're fulfilling about 613 commandments if they're able to do that, right? But then if you were a priest, you had 7 additional commandments for a total of 620. And these 7 could only be fulfilled by, priests. More specifically, perhaps even Levitical priests who could touch the ark, right? Because there were even a fewer number of priests that could do that labor. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because when you were talking about this, it got me thinking about divine gifts, and the firstborn usually inherits things like kingship and stuff. And so maybe there's, because of this, you can only one king, right? So maybe because of this rivalry with the firstborn, there's like a contention of sorts, because it seems like the Messiah, quote unquote, or the favored son is usually like the one that comes after, maybe. Um, but then also in Isaiah, there's this mentioning of making the way straight. And so I was thinking, like, oh, okay, so there's the one that comes first that precedes and does like the heavy lifting, so to speak, or whatever for Hashem, paves the way, right? And David did that too, right? Because he was only able to build the foundation. So I kind of see David almost as like a uh, firstborn, kind of sense that he paved the way for the Messiah that would come later. And I think he was maybe at 14 generations, maybe halfway through. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that stuff because you got me thinking about the firstborn stuff again with Seth. I really appreciated that story. And one last thing. I hate to be a normie, but there's a movie that came out with the Egyptian gods in it, and I can't remember the name of it. But there's a scene at the end where, sorry to spoil, but Set is having a conversation with Ra on his ship in the air, his bark, if you will, which Set barks, I guess, if you think about it. But anyway, they're having a conversation, and he's talking to him about how he wants to have children, have a wife, and have children, and have a kingdom on earth. And Ra's like, "Oh no, dude, I wanted you to take my place because only you can. Like you have that raw power." It reminds me of the story with Atum, the Egyptian creation story with the two eyes. He had the eye of Sophia, if you will, that gave him like prediction power, and then there was the other eye of dynamicism or power, raw power. He didn't have to run from Apep. He could stand toe to toe with him and just overpower him. And that was kind of like Seth's role, I think, with Ra, is because he had to have that raw power to stand toe to toe with Seth. And so I don't know if that meshes totally, but uh, I thought you might appreciate like the battling of the serpent thing because maybe it's that firstborn son. It's like his job to take on the serpent, directly, so that he makes the way clear, right? So that the other son can live in peace or whatever and have that like fruitfulness. Because Horus in this case was like meant to be the one ruling on Earth, I guess, which kind of reminds me of like the millennial reign. But anyway, thanks.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Joshua. Solar, please go ahead.
Just two things, but one, just real quick on that last bit. So, just as a side comment, I kind of find this funny, and maybe Kenneth Grant gets into it in other books that I haven't read, right? So, the dude is clearly obsessed with like snakes and dragons and stuff. Again, totally fine. Who dragons are heavy metal, like I'm here for it. But yeah. So, since it's kind of funny to me that he has so little to say about Apep, like he maybe mentions him like once or twice, but this is such a fixture of the kind of normative, like if you ask an academic, right, to basically give you the Wikipedia version of like Egyptian mythology or whatever, right, like one of Set's primary roles, at least in the early cult, um is going to be basically like slaying Apep and allowing, the sun to pass through and reemerge on the next day, right? So it's just kind of funny, right? Because there's almost this like identification of Set with his later mother Typhon, right? With the dragon, with snakes. Like if you look at the sigils of Set in a lot of the post Grant uh like orders and stuff, like he's literally portrayed as a snake. Like snakes are going to be like somewhere in the path working or whatever you're doing, right? I just found it funny how little he had to say about Apep, given the centrality of that in the sort of normie mythos. Um, shit. Oh yeah, I was also on the Levitical firstborn. I just wanted to point out, since I have the obligation to do the bit um of Jewish hyperborea here. So we do have a sense in which in the Bible we have if we're going with the Dumazil, like tripartite social categorization, right? So originally it's not the Levites who are given the priestly roles, right? It's the firstborn of all the tribes, right? And basically that they lose that role, and that's given to the Levites after the sin of the golden calf, right, in Exodus. But it does kind of point to an interesting sort of point in Jewish history where again, like assuming any of this actually happened, I find it more interesting conceptually since it's all mythology. But uh you do, it does sort of make reference to this period where you don't have kings yet, right? We're about to go into the period of conquest and the period of judges. So the family unit and the tribal and the clan distinctions are really the like operative like structures of this proto Hebrew society, right? And that probably actually was the case, right? As these tribes were coming together. And it's interesting that the head of the household, the firstborn, who had the material, the worldly sovereignty, was also the one who was tasked with carrying out the rites, the sort of proto priestly or pre priestly, really, religious rites, right? If you compare that to the sort of reconstructed proto Indo European conception of the paterfamilias, right? And you look at his sort of function in the hearth cult, right? He's the high priest of this sort of ancestor worshiping cult. He's also the, in charge of social and sort of material operations of this kind of household unit, right? And then it's organized by clan, tribe, etc. I think there's actually kind of an interesting, just sort of social or homology there. That's it's very far removed from the quote unquote Atlantean degeneration phase of the traditionalist kind of schema. But we see that too, right, in the elevation of the Levitical priests into their own distinct caste, away from the obligations of sort of worldly power and sovereignty. But yeah.
I think that was a great, great analogy. I think it speaks to the householder, sort of like the to borrow your and Spengler's word, but both of yours, and the anarch. I think that that's where it comes from. I really do. I really think that there is something like when I say the son and the daughter. I think talking about something Gnostic, something mythological, something cosmological, maybe something ontological. But I also think it's talking something about very material about that as well. Like we have someone named Seth who's in our lodge who comes to our spaces, who gets sometimes listed on the poster, who's listening right now from the deep state of Texas. So I'm just saying that there are fundamental material manifestations of these same archetypes. Of course there are, and like that is sort of what's interesting. And I'm gonna let Joshua go, but we're gonna start to do room shout outs and like let the co-hosts say what they want to say to end. And I won't do any grand outro today, but I just want to say thank you all. Very amazing space. I knew our book clubs are always like, I mean, that's how we started. I mean, it was like a lot. If you listen to those early Taoist ones, it's like Solar and I like back and forth. A lot of them, not all, but a lot of it. And then we did the Kabbalah, and we did Yarn Fortune. We did like a very normie way, but I think we talked about the Sephra very extensively, and so I appreciate it. I think this was a really good return to tradition, a good tradition, like discussing the word, because what is more powerful than that? Speaking over space and time. I mean, he even talks about this, and I'm going to read a little short snippet before we close, maybe as our kind of like disaggregation of Babylon, the Princess Babylon, not the mother. Okay, Joshua, please go ahead.
Yeah, man. So the one last thing I wanted to say was, um, firstborns of a family, just even secularly, you kind of expect more of them, right? So there's like this almost parentified role they have in assisting with maybe the rearing of the other children, and the children learn from them, of course, and so forth. So it's almost like they get some type of delegation, so of duties or something. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I am a firstborn, and I think it's interesting because that's almost somehow inherent. And I just was curious if there was any thoughts on that, if anybody else could relate.
Sorry, say that again, Joshua. The last question. I apologize.
I was just curious if anybody could relate or had any comment on that sort of thing, because it seems to be true in what I happen in my experience. It seems to be maybe more true. Like somehow the firstborn has like these added 7 commandments, for instance, for the priests from the tribes, like Solar was talking about. I think that tradition kind of has carried over and over time. It's like there's still some type of added responsibility on the firstborn. I think somehow, I don't know how to explain it. I was just curious if it related to anything.
Well, there is a tantric, sorry, Solar, there is a tantric idea of the Kuladeva, the clan deity, being propitiated by the firstborn son, which would obviously utilize tantric rites. The Kula Devata is never. It's not a normative deity. It's not like Vishnu. It can be Shakti, but it'll be a specific, very specific form, and it will take Pashubali. So I think that this is much more like upper caste Hinduism. This isn't even like a super tantric thing. Like, yes, there are, obviously, I'm saying there are tantric rites involved, and there are, but like this is an idea for sure of the clan deity. Solar, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was really just gonna make a very quick and general comment. I'm interested in the sort of staying power of primogenitor, not necessarily as like a system of inheritance in Crusader Kings 2 or real life or anything like that. But to me, because I come from a Christian background, right? And in my studies, um, I see this very, very clear link in the stubbornness of Germanic and just broadly sort of European pagan quote unquote Aryan notions of fate as being it was so intractable, right? That the sort of like early Christian, I don't want to say Catholic, but because I but you know what I mean. The early Christian church had to essentially like Germanicize itself in order to be able to spread up above the Alps essentially and to actually like penetrate these formerly Roman colonies and areas and stuff like that. Anyway, because it's like, well, what's special about the firstborn? Like, no one can really give you a good answer, right? Because like in a certain modern frame of reference, it's like, oh well, it's purely by chance, right? It just happened to be like anyone could have been the firstborn. And in a certain way of looking at it, that's nominally true. I find it interesting though that we still, even totally like subconsciously or unconsciously, we have this sort of like um whether you want to call it like a racial memory or this certain idea that certain things are fated, right? That in a certain sense it couldn't have been any other way, and that the firstborn does have, in some sense, like destiny, fate, etc., sort of weighs a little bit heavier on his shoulders. The firstborn male, particularly. I'm not trying to make any statements about that one way or the other, but just kind of from an anthropological perspective, I find it interesting how that persists. And in a way, I'm also a firstborn, right? So I feel that, right? And despite the complete lack of conscious articulation of anything like that, right? Nonetheless, it's still around, and it just speaks to sort of powerful cultural ideas, certain subcurrents, maybe not draconian currents, but currents nonetheless.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm also a firstborn son, so but I'm not. I'm not a fatalist. I'm not right. Like I'm really dharmic. I think it's all in a tantrics. I believe it's all mutable to a degree, and I think it's all. But I agree. I agree with that. I think it's a really interesting idea. But no, I think I'll leave it there. Okay, Solar, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just wanted to say too, the the sagas and the Eddas, right, are also ripe with stories of usurpation, of howling in rage and defiance against the gods, against the fate of humans, demigods, even gods themselves, actually, right? Like even Odin himself. Um, trying to say this in maybe a slightly more tantric way of transmuting their karma, right? Of alchemically altering and surfing the waves of destiny, right? So you have certain preconditions, certain initial conditions that you're given, and maybe those are sort of heightened, or there's some sort of like particular elements of that to like the firstborn in this case, right? That got us started talking about this. But I didn't want to neglect that, right? There is the sense of the sort of tragic hero or tragedy in the proper like Greek sense, right? But actually, again, I'm certainly not an expert in Greek sort of mythic framework. I'm more familiar with the Germanic, but in the Germanic, there's a little bit more like dynamism even than you see in certainly like something like Ajax or something, where these people are literally it's simply like it kind of this It's tragic because these things are inescapable. There's more play, there's more defiance, there's more left hand path perspectives, if you will, I think embedded in that same Germanic framework. That's all.
I actually will be really flexible, and I'll say that I don't dismiss that there are antagonistic polarities and currents that you can both see and perhaps percolate to the surface from those texts. I agree. But again, I think it's all emptiness. So I think it's like, how do you play the polarities? Well, I think you play the polarities by bringing it all in and letting it go. That's like maybe my fundamental way to respond to that. But I agree, if you're going to do sorcery, you need to understand how they work, where they go, how to direct them properly, how to rectify them properly, and how to synthesize them properly. So I think all of the ideas can very easily be contained in those texts. I have no problem with that. Like, look, we have all taken, we all know esoterica to a degree. If you come to these spaces, you have too have heard us discuss intermediate ideas. Maybe not the whole space, but much of the space. And very rarely is it entry level, no matter what anyone says. So I don't know. Like, I don't even know. Like, Solar brought this idea up that I had talked about. Like, he didn't bring it up because I talked about it. I've spoken about it a million years ago, and then I totally forgot about it. Then he said, like, yeah, there's always going to be an outer temple of people. I agree with that. There's always going to be people for whom the normative belief system is perfectly fine, and then and we have to be okay with that. So, what is the external outer temple material? Like, I think that's a good question. But like, there's all these other people. There's I'm not even saying us. I'm saying like, just there's this broader landscape of people who either say or have perhaps dipped their toe into esoterica, into the occult, into magic, and they're kind of left wondering at the sort of the paradoxes of a material reality. They kind of know, but they don't know. They're not. They haven't seen death. They haven't seen the lightning strike yet. But they're looking upwards. They're looking for that. Maybe they know it's possible. Maybe they don't. Maybe they know how to get there. Maybe they don't. So I think that there's like this inner temple decoherence, you could say. So there's a group of people who are looking for sort of this higher meaning, both within and without institutions. And I think that's okay. And I think that there is a kind of like Solar brought up at the very beginning about synthesis, about how it's like, yeah, like looking at Kenneth Grant, like it's not neat, it's not clean, no. But you know what? Maybe it's the genesis of something. And maybe there is no perfect synthesis, but maybe what it has to be is distilled, like Joshua said, distilled, like you say, 7 times, purified 7 times, furnace of earth, right? Silver tried 7 times, so you're purifying the asotic consciousness, you could say. And yeah, so I think it's possible. I think a synthesis is possible. I think an understanding of these deeper Gnostic ideas, relating them. Joshua brought up the idea of Twilight language, Sambodia Gaia. Like, of course, inner outer secret. How many layers are there? Are there 5 layers? Are there 7 layers? Are there 9 layers? Are there 10 layers? Are there 11 layers? Are there 13 layers? Well, I'm just saying there's so many ideas, right? There's so many ideas of like the broader, like, what are we dealing with? Is it all hyperspace kingdom? I like to think so. But I'm not, the truth is like, I've spoken about this so many times, but the planets to me are minor archons. I'm not saying they're evil or anything. Even the outer 3. Like, when I talk about them, I'm not really talking about Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune. I really think of them from like a more tantric perspective. I think of them as like the stars behind that. So what does that mean? But of course, you can relate. There are things I can relate to the planets themselves. But I just think of them as more part of the paths, more klipothic, but not inherently, malevolent in their nature. Just different ways to sort of understand how to walk through. So I don't know. I think he's an innovator from my perspective, in a big way, because he emphasizes that sort of Dathic connection. And I don't saying he's the first in terms of like, obviously Manjushri can be likened very closely to Dath, and like the non-dual sword, the flaming gnosis sword, like that's even how it's translated. So non-dual gnosis sword, excuse me, flaming non-dual gnosis sword, cutting away all duality. So I think that's what Dath is for me, fundamentally, if you want to say that. It's like non-dual consciousness. The lightning strike, I mean, he even describes it as that. He obviously assigns it other properties, maybe more things that I would think of. I think there's a magnetic quality, but I don't necessarily think it's magnetic in the banal way he describes. For me. I'm just saying for me. That's my perspective. But I didn't see it exactly the same, but I understood. I think a meeting of the polarities is a more interesting way to look at Dath, rather than saying magnetize. Okay, yes, Joshua, please go ahead.
Well, we brief, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is a diamagnetic and magnetic property to both iron and copper. So there is indeed a magnetic relationship with both of those planets. So maybe that could help to add some to it.
Well, it depends, right? I think it is. Look, I think there are. It's just like Chinese medicine. I posted about this with the episode for Crystal. If you're interested in hearing me talk about herbalism, you can. If you're not, that's okay. But I'm just saying, I did post something from the Chanel Ben song, which is the divine husbandsman, yeah, divine husbandsman, herbal book. So there are 7 kind of relationships, axiomatic relationships, you could say, in Chinese medicine, and then they will give plants like a name, like a minister or prince or a king or emperor, and you have to sort of understand the natures of the herbs in terms of like weight and relationship with each other, like how they work within the formula. Are they edifying? Are they like going to empower each other? Are they antagonistic? This is often a word used. So I think that's a relationship that exists between all the spheres, in my opinion. I think there are all these little and this also is true for the planets as well. And that's also, you could say, that's karma. You could say like the sort of disaggregating the relationships between them. And like then relating it back to Malkuth, relating it back to yourself, saying, how does this implicate me? Is there any result of these like things that have coalesced in my life that I have done in this life? And if there aren't, then you have to understand that, okay, maybe I'm playing something out. So maybe this is the time. Like for me, I thought this is a great time to practice Tantra, to avert some obstacles before me. I've never shied away from like a left-hand path label. Like, be very clear about it. I'm not saying this for any of you. I'm just saying in general. Like, I understand what it is. And so I think it's important that you also understand what it is as well. Like, if you're going to confront the things, you have to be ready to do it. And so that's what my whole point about like inner temple stuff. Like, if you're going to be in the inner temple, like, I'm not always prepared. I'm the first to say. Like, this has been both an incredible and a tumultuous like path. But I'm very edified. I'm very like, I'm in a place of, I'm not saying happiness or anything that's like so fleeting, but I'm in a place of like, I feel very good. I don't know what other words to use, but I feel like we're in a good place. I'm very excited for the show. I'm very excited for my show. We have the right people. We've got a lot of people listening. We've got a lot of people watching, and we're just at a time of birth. To sort of like relate it to the book. Like, we're right at a time where the lightning could strike. I can feel it. It's like electric in my heart. And so I just want to make sure that we are prepared, that we do talk about outer temple material. Or not outer temple, excuse me, inner temple material, excuse me. And so people are going to react in specific ways to that. So that's why I'm careful. But I also recognize that it's like you have to give people the tools that they're going to be able to engage with the material at their level. So I do think sitting, like Solar said, like sitting, like I don't use a cushion. Like, he might use a cushion. You know, those Zen bros, they like their comforts. But I personally don't use a cushion. I sit on a wood floor. That is not going to be comfortable for everyone. I get it. That's just what I do. Okay. But I think you should be sitting. I think you should be meditating every day. Every day. I think it's so important, especially if you're going to come to these spaces where all these things happen in consent, where all these things happen across space and time, where we do make magic, where magic is real, where plus ultra is real, where we are synthesizing like actively in real time. I'm not saying it's like generative synthesis. Not all synthesis is. But like, and I'm saying this about myself, so I'm not saying this about anyone else or telling you what to do. I'm just saying I have to make sure that I'm reconciled so I can come to the spaces and be in the place where we can do this, which is like a which is a place that I love to be on a Friday night. I know it's not always possible, but when it is magic. So with that being said, at 22 after, let's let the co-host close himself out. Then I'll do room shoutouts, and then we'll say goodnight. Solar, start us off.
Sure. And this is a closing remark, I promise. So in preparation for this space today, in addition to kind of going over the great material, I was looking back through the Carlson book that I mentioned earlier, which is also foundational for the subject. And I was actually kind of shocked to notice how many divergences there were, both from not just from Grant's material, but from traditional, like baseline Kabbalah stuff, in terms of planetary attributions, in terms of understanding of the four worlds of manifestation from Atziya to Absolute, etc. Right? It was just like totally different. And I've also been thinking a lot about Saturn, the dimensions of Binah, um, maybe with certain Uranian impulses in mind. I don't know, who can say. Anyway, and it got me thinking to back to some of our old spaces, right? Where and some of the old podcasts that Jin did that eventually that kind of brought me to the show, to this community, kind of at its inception, things like that. And I was reminded about how far my understanding has come and how I'm then sort of circling back in this sort of ever rotating spiral, of reappraising material, reapproaching material, finding all these sort of new avenues and new dimensions to what I thought were sort of closed questions, right, in my mind. It turns out I didn't understand a damn thing, and I want to go back and reopen these things. Anyway, and this is all to say that I'm incredibly grateful to have stumbled in on this community, and grateful that I get to sort of be on this journey with you, right? To be able to have these conversations, and it's tremendously generative for me, and I'm humbled and grateful. So thanks for being here, guys.
That's legit how I feel. So I'll just say that. And you make Jen sound so cool. I'll use third person. You make him sound so cool. All these old podcasts I did, they were pretty cool. They're due for a revival too. Anyways, Joshua, please go ahead. Thank you so much, Solar. I appreciate it. I'm really glad you could be with us after your absence last week. Obviously, we shouted you. Obviously, they shouted. Yeah, you were absent last week. That's why. Sorry, I don't know. It's blurring together. But yes, yeah, I'm glad that we were able to do this, especially because Matt is traveling. Let me just shout him out after Solar. And if you want to check Matt out, you can definitely follow him at MattMurrah19. Check out his website, his spiritual services. Check out our episode on rejects. We did Tipperith and Netzach, and it was really good, really profound for me. And as I said, and I learn a lot from Matt. He's so young, but he has the dynamism that Solar is talking about, like the ability to sort of reframe, rethink, reappraise, reappropriate, sort of take things out of their like uber traditionalist, like old churn as I like to call it, sort of like framing, and he'll like put it in a fresher, new way, which I don't always agree with. I'm the first to tell him. Like when we talk Kabbalah, like in DM, I'm the first to say like I don't agree with this, but I'll make a case for why, and he'll make a case for why, and then we'll sort of sit on it, and then we can like come to back together, and like maybe it'll be an hour, maybe it'll be like a day. That's often how our discussions go. We'll like sort of sit with it, and then we kind of like think about it and come back. So it's good, it's useful, like, to be in the polarity, like, to be in the tension, and, like, to have these very far-ranging discussions. I also learn a lot. Like, I've never come on the internet and thought I was number one, the greatest, the best, the most, like, OG sorcerer that ever lived. I never thought that. You can go back to those old podcasts. I was so nervous, and I would say, like, I don't know anything. And I still feel like I don't know anything, but I feel like I have a good grasp of the foundation, even if I'm not always the most pragmatic about employing it. And I think I also have a very good grasp of some of the more traditional tantric ideas, but I also recognize so many vast elements in them in modern left-hand path occultism. And so I like to think of it as like an archaeologist, like looking at it and appraising it from its epicenter, but also looking at, like, this is where the seed has come. So is there a point, like, is it a worthwhile seed to even discuss? And often it is, and that's sort of what I'm realizing. There's a lot of these ideas that are so interesting and so fascinating, and it's also like 2025. Like, we should be able to look at whatever material we want to, in terms of like occult esoterica. We should be able to appraise the material as we will it and as we are capable of doing so, and not be silted by everyone's preconception. And that's a really unfortunate kind of turn that we've come into, where magic is both being very normalized, like this idea of like broader esoterica, broader occultism, but people have such polarized views of it. Some people accept it very normiville, like, yeah, it's real, but what does it even mean? What does it matter? That's not great. Then you have like people who are so stuck in the institutions. Well, that's not that great either. And then you have people who will say instantly, "Oh, it's satanic, it's this," and I'm not using them as pejorative. I'm just verbatim repeating what they say, and it's just it's almost like an obscuration. We'll end on a Klipothic note. It's very much an obscuration of like what the actual truth is. Is that it's honestly a lot of the time exploring your own consciousness, exploring phenomena around you, but also phenomena that you might just be perceiving. So I think it's actually in detriment when you have like crazy negative reactions to any text, simply because we should be able to look at them as like relatively rational people, relatively intellectual people, relatively, and interesting people, definitely that. So we're able to sort of appraise it in our own ways and our own like non-dual kind of like middle path perspective, at least in the spaces. And I think that's really, really valuable, and I think that's really useful. And I think it will still take, even though some people are copying us, like I have noticed, because I follow all these lamoids on IG, and I can just see like the adoption of like some of our Gnostic ideas and stuff, which is fine. I'm fine with it now. I used to be so protective of like any work that I did or any work that we did generated as a group, and I still am to a like high degree. Like, you need me to fight for you, I like, I'm your boy. Like, you call me in, I'm gonna fight. I might not be a great like shield bearer. I'm the first to say. Like, I'm a monkey king. I'm like, I'll come in, I'll do some melee, but like, I'm not a tank. Like, that's not me. So, I'm strictly melee, strictly magic melee, so magical swordsman. Basically that's it. So, you know, I think that that's how you also have to approach it, though. I think that's sort of one of my strengths. If I'm going to give myself any strength, is that I can sort of monkey my way in the text. I can just throw it all up and say, let's look at these little things that I think is like noticeable, is that interesting. And I don't really hold them as like, I've come a long way, and I have to say, like, Solar and Matt have pushed me a lot in this, but I have come a long way in the terms of looking at things in such a traditionalist sort of mode. And it's not that I've abandoned Dharma or Buddhism in any way. I'm thinking like in very pragmatic terms, like, what is the new American Dharma? Like, I really want to know what that is. I'm not the only one that's interested in this idea. I'm not even the only one talking about it. I have other Dharma mutuals who write Substacks about it. So obviously, when we were talking about this a year ago, we were doing something fucking right, because we were generating like a seed that seems to be people are interested in, because it's not just Buddhists. It's like other Americans, other creative people. I don't know if I'm a creative, but like I know a lot of you are, and I like to think of myself as one for sure. Sometimes, and so, but I just see a lot of people discussing this: American Shinto, American Dharma. Like what is the New World religion? And you see like this across the timeline, like people fighting about it. It's like, I'm just like, I would rather be a generator rather than a hater, rather than a wrecker. Like, yeah, Prince of Breaking Klippas for sure. I still hold the title, but I'm just going to say like, I'm in a generative space, so I would like to continue with that, but again, non-dual, so I'll still fight a Naga, no problem. That being said, okay, Joshua, I'm sorry. Please close yourself. Mike, I'll close Monty and Matt, and then I'll do room shoutouts and we'll go.
Thank you. Yeah, man. Every chance I get, I'm paladin, so I love being tank. But I guess Ares, that's what a battering ram really is for, right? Like it can withstand the frontal assault or whatever, the head of things, the vanguard. Um, but just a reminder that this week was Outbreak Week in the Resident Evil lore. So ahead of Jin's release of our episode on Threshold Saints, if you're a fan of the Resident Evil franchise, maybe give it a play. It's free to stream on PlayStation Network, I noticed. So, anyway, I just wanted to shout that out. And Jill Valentine had to get out of Raccoon City by the end of the month. And which brings me to my next thing. We just had Yom Teruah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And then in 4 days from now, it'll be Day of Judgment, Yom Kippur, rather. Sorry, Day of Atonement or Judgment Day. So anyway, just thought it was kind of funny that the two things kind of aligned this year. But I happen to have a shofar I just got this year, so I'm not gonna like blast it in the mic, but I just wanted to kind of give it a shout out. Anyway, thanks so much. Shabbat shalom.
Thanks, Grandpa. We appreciate it. Really glad that you came. Always glad to see you. Mike, please go ahead.
Okay, short and sweet. I mean, I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful that this exists. And I mean, repeating what everyone else was saying, it is very nice to have a space where we can talk about these things openly. I mean, before this, I was just doing stuff on my own. So to have other people where you can get inspiration and learn things and motivate you is very, very good to have. And I'm glad that we have it. And that's it, really. I don't have anything to plug. Thank you guys, and good night.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll do room shoutouts really quick. Avi, of course, just launched her yoga business, which you can find on, of course, her pinned. I think it's your pinned, right, Avi? It's yeah, I believe it is, and her pinned tweet is her new thing, and so everybody check that out. She is a Grey Lodge member from day one. Thank you so much, Avi, for sticking around, for being a Dakini of the Lodge, as I often like to call you, and definitely because Dakinis can manifest in many ways. And material women, most especially, but not always. Sir Tim of the Tunnels, thank you so much. Fellow Hapaborian from the great state of Hawaii, appreciate you. Definitely leaping through the Pacifica, the Oceania, space and time to be with us. Appreciate that. Cassandra, thank you. Logi, content creator, Etsy store, all your things. You do a lot, so I'm sorry that I'm forgetting all of them, but I'm not really. Everybody check out Cassandra, and she's a very kind and sensitive person, so I really appreciate her. Zachary Shumar is my co-host on many episodes of Threshold Saints. I don't know if that's the one you listen to, Joshua, but yes, my episodes with both Zachs are some of my favorite ones, simply because they are really interesting, and it's really like that was the launch. Like, yeah, they were my 20th episodes and all of that, but it was like the launch of, like, people started really taking the show a lot more seriously after those. So we really appreciate that, and it was it's like I've come this far because of those episodes. Like, that's where the idea of metafiction and parafiction, sort of like, I always knew what they were. I mean, I knew what those things were. I had read Nick Land before. I met Nick Land. And I was like, but it really didn't take shape in my mind of what those things were. Like, I'm just being honest. I'm saying, like, yeah, the seed was there, but they didn't, like, I didn't see the contours of it at all. It didn't expand. But then I kind of saw, I was like, oh, she's embedding so much Kabbalah, so much esoterica, like right in her writing, like right in her supposed parapolitical writings. And that's really interesting because that's often what Crowley does. So it's like real events, magical events, all mixed together. So at that moment, I was very interested in finding out what she meant. But now I realize, like, it's really hard to know what someone really meant. You have to, there's a space, like an emptiness, right? That you have to kind of reconcile and be okay with. It's hard for me, I'm not going to lie. But now I'm just interested in, like, finding things that are closest to the truth. Just following the American Dharma, whatever that forms into the Great Dragon. I like him. I like Rahu. Like, I'm a Rahu enjoyer, but I'm also like I'm a son enjoyer. I'm a daughter enjoyer. I like the whole cosmology. I'm down with it. So I'm gonna follow those things and like follow the Seth, follow the Nuria, follow the dragon. That's what I'm interested in going forward. And I'm really lucky that I had incredible people join me, because that's what obviously doing the Grey Lodge was about. It was always about doing a co-host show, which was my initial podcast stream. I told this to Solar the other day. It was like my initial podcast, like imaginal, you could say, was doing a group show. Not just with me, not even with me as the moderator, just like me being a part of a group show. I just had I guess I had the golden balls to, to start doing a crazy thing into the screaming into the void. So that's what it is. So I was lucky. I met a lot of really great people. It's been terrible, great and terrible at the same time. But everyone who is like still here, who I do rely on, maybe in a more fundamental way, they make it worth it. Because I would have ran a long time ago. Not just because I didn't want to do it. I actually want to do it. I just often run from things that I like. So, we all play the polarities in a specific way, right? So, okay, Miss MT Well, thank you for coming back. Really appreciate it. Dharma Brother, he does have an episode coming out. It's just not coming out for a couple more weeks. But he does have an episode coming up on Threshold Saints. Thank you so much. De Morgan, thank you so much. Weeb Chat, brother, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate that. I see all that. I know I teased you about this a couple weeks ago that you followed me back, but actually we've been mutuals for quite a while now. So thank you so much. Appreciate it greatly. Of course, Seth, or my little Naga, as I call you, appreciate it, from the great state of Texas. We're putting out good prayers for Seth. We'll put it on the Aether Wave right now, the Aether Wave recording. Yes, he is looking actively for a job. So we're putting it out that he will get one of his choosing. So thank you so much, Seth. Appreciate it. Appreciate your quiet and hilarious DMs as well. So that is pretty much it, I think. I won't even make us close on a magic number. I'll let it be kind of in the space of infinitude, we'll say. I don't know. Eternitas. I don't know. But thank you guys so much. The love is the cause of knowledge, of course, and emptiness is not nothingness. I think that's what fundamentally what Solar was asking. It's like, what is the difference between emptiness and nothingness? Void is nothingness, but light also emerges from nothingness. So it isn't really nothingness. It's really emptiness, which is luminousness and masslessness. So wisdom and method together, Binah and Hokmah together. But then there's also life. There's a life that has to come up, right? The man has to come up. Malkuth has to come up to death. Because then you're looking up together. You're looking up at the higher power. So that's the one thing I would say about Grant, if I'm going to give a closing remark, is that I think it's both. I think both of them are important. I don't think it's like a privilege of like Dath or Kether. I don't think that they're in opposition like that. And I don't think they're meant to be either. I think it's a much more relational process. that's kind of why I've been interested in indigenous ontology and make you all listen to it so much, because I'm interested in the connections, the paths, and also the, the invisible threads, the real, that's really what karma is, and that's really what dharma is. Really, it's the recognition and sort of the acceptance that they're there. So, okay, I'm sorry, I won't be, soft or whatever. I'm back. I'm back. Okay, so thank you guys so much. You can check us out, thetruegraylodge.com. Matt Murrah, Monty, of course. Monty has an upcoming episode on Berserk on my show. And hopefully we'll get him and Zach together for Dondada. And I also have an episode with Bicky, and I have an episode with Bicky and an episode with Monty also. So I just want to, an episode with Bicky and Monty is what I'm saying. I've got so many. Okay. So, anyways, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna drop the Gordon White and Greg Carlwood episodes this week, probably like tonight or tomorrow. And also like and subscribe. I have to say that now. I got told. Like and subscribe to our YouTube. Like and subscribe to our YouTube. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. We allow the daughter to dance free in the aether wave, and we set no conceptual preconceptions before her. Just going to let her break the klipas on her own. So we're letting the egregore free, as we will every space now moving forward. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it, and have an amazing night. Everybody meditate. Everybody meditate. Every day. Sit every day. Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.